The sun, as old as the world itself, bled across the high desert, turning the endless, parched dunes into waves of bruised purple and violent gold. Here, in the heart of what would one day be merely forgotten dust, stood the Obsidian City, the cradle of the Seraphim Empire. Its walls, black as cooled volcanic glass and soaring beyond the arrogance of men, seemed to defy the very laws of erosion and time. But every empire, no matter how eternal it appears, carries the seed of its own decay. Our story begins not in the marble halls of the High Council, nor beneath the jewel-encrusted feet of the God-Emperor, but in the silence of the city's lowest tier, in a dusty courtyard where the scent of burnt oil and crushed jasmine mingled with the oppressive heat. Thanks for listening to Boring for Sleep. If this story helped you drift away, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is the tale of Elara. She was born under a twin moon, a celestial omen that the city's astrologers interpreted as a sign of profound division. Her mother, a weaver of royal tapestries, held her with a fear that transcended simple parental worry. She knew what the Empire did to those marked by destiny. The Seraphim did not tolerate deviation. It demanded conformity. Elara's childhood was a tapestry of contradiction. By day, she saw the splendor, the towering ziggurat of the sun, where sacrifices were made to keep the celestial engine turning, the flawless aqueducts that snaked across the desert, bringing the lifeblood of the distant mountain springs. The libraries, holding scrolls of knowledge so vast they contained the memory of 1,000 generations. The empire was magnificent. It was perfect. But by night she saw the scar. She was barely 5 when she first slipped out, drawn by a sound, a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate not through the air, but through the very earth beneath her bare feet. It led her past the bustling artisan quarter, beyond the silent barracks of the Praetorians, and finally, to the massive, black gate of silent tears. It was not silent at all. This was the entrance to the lower city, the place where the unmarked lived, those who had refused the ritual branding, those who still held to the old desert gods, those who were the silent, aching heart of the rebellion that the Empire pretended did not exist. Every night, 1,000 small acts of defiance, 1,000 whispered prayers, drifted up like smoke. Elara pressed her small face against the cold obsidian. She heard the music, a haunting flute, the melody ancient and sorrowful, a song of freedom played in the cage of an endless city. And then she saw him. He was older, perhaps 12. His skin was the color of the desert at sunset, and his eyes, when they briefly met hers across the dark, were the startling, fierce blue of a distant glacier. He was sitting on a broken cistern, carving a small, simple bird from a piece of sun-bleached driftwood. He was an unmarked, a threat, a poet. Their eyes locked. In that single, electric moment, the fate of the Empire pivoted. She, the daughter of a servant to the crown, destined for a life of quiet obedience within the walls of flawless power. He, a shadow from the depths, destined to either die fighting the machine or become the fire that would burn it down. He did not smile. He simply raised the wooden bird, held it for a second, a dark silhouette against the moonlight, and then placed it on the wall for her to find. It was a common starling, a bird that sang its heart out even in the face of predators. Elara knew, with the terrifying, absolute certainty of a child, that she should run. That she should report him. That this small, beautiful act was treason against the magnificent, perfect machine of the seraphim. She did not run. She reached out, took the starling, and tucked it into the pocket of her simple dress, a cold piece of wood now warming against her terrified heart. That night, in the luxurious silence of her family's small chamber, she lay awake, the wooden starling clutched tight. She did not hear the city's ordered hum. She heard only the faint, sorrowful flute music from below. And she understood, for the first time, that the Seraphim Empire was not built on black obsidian. It was built on a foundation of unacknowledged, agonizing human grief. Elara had found her first secret. And secrets, in an empire of absolute truth, are the most dangerous weapons of all. The twin moons that marked Elara's birth faded into the Empire's rigid calendar, but the division they symbolized only grew sharper. By the time she was 12, Elara wasn't just a child of the court, she was a student of its silence. Her days were spent in the atelier of the Royal Needle, a place of hushed reverence and staggering wealth. The air was thick with the scent of imported silks and rare dyes, saffron yellow, lapis lazuli blue, and the terrifying, deep crimson reserved only for the emperor's robes. Her teacher, the Mistress Elara, was a woman sculpted by decades of flawless loyalty, her face a mask of serene, unwavering compliance. "Observe, Elara," Elara would murmur, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the threads. "The strength of the empire is not in the size of its army, but in the perfection of its pattern. Every thread must follow the design. Deviation creates weakness. Weakness invites ruin." Elara learned her craft with unnatural speed. She mastered the seraphim stitch, a technique so intricate it made the figures in the tapestries appear to breathe. She learned the symbolic language of the court, the golden hawk for eternal vigilance, the black river for absolute power, the perfect, unblemished sun for the God Emperor himself. She wove a narrative of unstoppable victory and eternal peace, her young hands creating flawless lies on cloth worth more than 100 lives in the lower city. But her mind was a battlefield. Every night, after the guard's last patrol, after the oil lamps were turned low, Elara would extract her small, obsidian-colored diary, a gift from her mother, meant for sketching floral patterns. Inside, however, she sketched not flowers, but maps. Detailed, perfect maps of the palace, the administrative buildings, the routes the elite Praetorian Guard took on their rounds. She knew every drain grate, every loose paving stone, every window that did not latch fully. Her education was a masterclass in duality. During the day, she absorbed the empire's public truth. At night, she mapped its vulnerabilities. The focus of her nightly obsession remained the gate of silent tears. It wasn't the noise she listened for anymore, but the absence of it. The silence itself became a coded message. She was 16 when she saw Kael again, close up. She waited one evening near the gate, hiding in the shadow of a massive water cistern, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was now a young woman, tall and graceful, her clothes simple but impeccably clean, marking her as of the upper world. Then she saw him. He emerged from the shadows of the lower tunnels. Kael was no longer the boy with the haunted eyes. He was lean, sharp, and moved with the unsettling economy of a predator. He wore the rough, dark linen of the unmarked, and the marks of a brutal existence were etched into the set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders. He carried a small, leather-bound volume, a book of philosophy stolen from an ancient archive, and a small, wickedly sharp carving knife. He was a thinker and a fighter, a dangerous combination. He did not walk past her. He came directly to the cistern where she hid. He did not speak a single word. He simply placed a freshly carved piece of wood on the ledge. This time, it was not a starling, but a coiled viper, its form elegant but its threat undeniable. Elara's breath hitched. She should be terrified. This was a symbol of outright rebellion, a direct challenge to the imperial hawk. She looked at him, truly looked, across the short, dusty distance. His eyes, still that unsettling, glacial blue, held hers. They were filled not with the fire of hate, but with a deep, consuming exhaustion, the weariness of someone who knows the fight is necessary, but endless. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out what she had brought, a small packet of rare, imported dye. Not a dye for tapestry, but a compound of herbs her mother used for healing, virtually untraceable. In the court, it was a luxury item. In the tunnels, it could save a life from infection. She laid the small packet next to the coiled viper. Kael's gaze flickered down to the dye. For the first time in years, the tension in his face eased by a fraction. It wasn't gratitude she saw, but recognition. He understood the danger she faced just by being there. He understood the unspoken covenant, that she would give him the resources of the upper world, and he would give her the truth of the world beneath. He picked up the dye, and then, his hand hovered over the viper. Instead of leaving the dangerous symbol, he picked it up, opened the cover of her diary, and replaced it with a different carving, a single, perfect almond blossom, carved from pale, fragile wood. It was a symbol of hope and of awakening. A fleeting promise of spring in the eternal winter of the Empire. Then, with the ghost of a nod, Kael melted back into the shadows beneath the gate. Elara stood there long after he was gone, the warmth of the almond blossom carving against her palm. He was giving her information. The viper meant danger was imminent. The blossom meant the mission had been averted, or perhaps postponed, and that he was thinking of her safety. Their communication had evolved into a silent, elaborate espionage ballet. The very next day, a storm broke in the palace. A small, high-ranking official was found dead, poisoned by a rare, imported toxin. The guards were everywhere, questioning everyone. Suspicion fell instantly on the unmarked. Elara sat at her loom, her heart a block of ice, weaving a small border of black river symbols onto a ceremonial banner. The tension was palpable. General Valerius, the Emperor's chief enforcer, a man whose presence could chill a room to freezing, entered the atelier. He rarely came here. He was a legendary warrior, not a patron of the arts. He stopped directly behind Elara, watching her hands work with the black thread. Mistress Elara. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. The hands of these girls are instruments. They create the Empire's glory. But the mind is where treason is conceived. Elara bowed low. My students are loyal, General. Their every thought is dedicated to the eternal sun. Valerius's obsidian eyes settled on Elara's tapestry. And what are you weaving, young Elara? She did not flinch, did not pause the movement of the shuttle. A repeating border, General. The Black River, symbolizing the unyielding flow of imperial justice. And what happens? Valerius pressed, his voice deceptively soft. If a single thread is pulled from that river? Does the whole pattern unravel? No, General, Elara replied, her voice clear and steady. The other threads hold it. But the flaw is there forever. A scar in the perfection. It must be cut out and replaced entirely, or the tapestry is ruined. Valerius stared at her for a long, unsettling moment. Most people met his gaze with terror. Elara met it with the cool, focused intensity of an artisan measuring her work. He saw not a frightened girl, but a mind that calculated consequences. A slow, chilling smile touched his lips. An impressive answer, Elara. You understand the true cost of deviation. Keep your threads straight. He turned and left, the silence he left behind louder than any accusation. Elara knew she had passed the test, but she also knew she had been noticed. She understood the deeper meaning of his interrogation. He was not testing her loyalty to the stitch, but her willingness to betray her own kind to save the pattern. That night she held the almond blossom in her hand, thinking of Kael and the impossible choice ahead. They were two poles of the same world, the perfection of the light and the honesty of the shadow. And she, Elara, was the only thing connecting them, the taut, breaking thread between the Empire and the inevitable storm. The silent education of her youth was over. The time for action was beginning. The royal archives were not merely a repository of scrolls. They were the Empire's collective memory, a tomb where the Seraphim carefully buried any truth inconvenient to the reigning dynasty. It was a place guarded by shadows and enforced silence, located deep beneath the ziggurat of the sun. To enter was to walk into the echo of 1,000 dead years. Elara knew she needed access. The quiet exchanges with Kael, the viper and the almond blossom, were enough for survival, but not for war. To truly fight the Empire, she had to understand its origins, its foundational weakness. She had to find the original covenant. Her opportunity arose not from stealth, but from the relentless, subtle logic of the court. General Valerius's watchful eye after the poisoning incident had inadvertently worked in her favor. Recognizing her sharp mind, he commissioned her mother to weave a new set of ceremonial banners detailing the lineages of the High Council. The task required exhaustive research. Mistress Elara, aging and trusting, handed Elara the coveted bronze scroll, the permission note needed to enter the lowest tiers of the archives. Do not touch anything outside the designated lineage scrolls, Elara, her mother warned, her eyes filled with nervous dread. This place is sacred. A single misplaced word could undo a generation of work. Hurry, and do not speak to the watchers. Elara bowed, the bronze scroll heavy and cold in her hand, a tangible pass to the intellectual heart of the machine. The watchers of the archives were not guards but scribes, old, dust-covered men whose lives were spent copying and curating the approved history. They smelled of dry papyrus and burnt oil, and their eyes held the distant, detached gaze of those who lived more in the past than the present. Elara settled into the designated reading cell. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic scratching of the scribe's styluses. For the first 2 days she was meticulous. She studied the lineage scrolls, charting the official history of the god emperors, noting the seamless transitions of power, the heroic deeds, the perfect, unbroken flow of divine right. She played her part with perfect obedience. But beneath the massive, official scrolls, she kept a small, unauthorized packet of blank, cheap parchment. And with her back to the main hall, her breathing regulated to a near-silent rhythm, she began her true work. She started with the apocryphal section, the place where scrolls deemed unverified or pre-dynastic were kept. The air here was colder, the scrolls more fragile. The official narrative claimed the Seraphim dynasty was the first and only true civilization. Yet, the Apocrypha whispered of what came before. She read of the Pylus, a civilization of engineers who mastered the aqueducts but lacked the divine ambition of the Seraphim. She read of the Desert Covenant, a simple treaty signed between the nomadic tribes, the ancestors of the unmarked, and the first city builders. This treaty established a mutual right to water and land, a promise that the bounty of the earth would be shared, not hoarded. The official history recorded that the god emperor bestowed water upon the land. The Desert Covenant proved he had merely stolen the control mechanisms from the Pylus and betrayed his early allies. The sheer, staggering truth hit her with physical force. Her entire life, her mother's loyalty, the beauty of the tapestries, the majesty of the black walls, was founded on a fundamental, engineered lie. The empire was not a divine gift, it was a military coup disguised as destiny. Over the next week, Elara grew bolder. She discovered a section titled The Fated Edicts, scrolls so ancient they were never catalogued or reviewed, likely forgotten centuries ago. Here, she found what she was truly looking for, the text of the original treaty, written on thick, dried animal skin. The language was simple, poetic, and irrefutable. It dedicated the land to all peoples who dwell under the twin moons, and specified that the leadership was to be held by a rotating council, chosen by merit, not blood. The current Seraphim dynasty was built entirely on blood and exclusion. Elara spent a frantic half-hour copying the key phrases and dates onto her hidden parchment, her stylus flying. She memorized the precise location of the original scroll, a clay jar marked with the symbol of an extinct mountain flower. She was so engrossed that she did not hear the light, deliberate footsteps behind her until a voice, crisp and dry as aged parchment, spoke. "An admirable curiosity, young weaver." Elara froze. She slowly turned. It was the chief scribe, Master Lyron, an elderly man with eyes that saw everything and reported nothing. He held a small, unlit lamp. Elara prepared for the condemnation, the shame, the inevitable prison sentence. She shielded her hidden notes with her body. Lyron did not approach. He merely gestured to the wall of forgotten scrolls. The Emperor pays me to ensure that the memory of the Seraphim is flawless. It is my duty to preserve the approved narrative. He then looked directly into her eyes, and a fleeting, profound melancholy crossed his ancient face. But it is also my duty, Elara, to preserve the truth for the future, should the future ever be ready to receive it. He paused, a deliberate, earth-shattering pause. The jar marked with the mountain flower, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely disturbed the dust motes. It contains a powerful toxin, Mistress Elara. Be sure you know how to handle it, should you choose to open it. Lyron did not wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked away, his lamp still unlit, leaving Elara to process the chilling realization. The chief scribe knew. He knew the location of the truth, and he knew that she was seeking it. He wasn't stopping her. He was giving her a warning, a coded, fatal warning about the danger of wielding that knowledge. The old man, the keeper of the Empire's lies, was a secret sympathizer. He was the Empire's silent lament, the weight of the historical lie pressing down on his soul. Elara left the archives an hour later, the bronze scroll returned, the lineage research finished, and the hidden parchment clutched deep within her dress. She carried not just notes, but a weapon of pure, distilled fact. She had the truth. Now, she had to find Kael and tell him that their fight was not just for freedom, but for legitimacy. The Seraphim Empire was not just cruel, it was an illegal regime built on a historical fraud. That night, she would not wait by the gate of silent tears. She had to risk a face-to-face meeting. The information was too explosive to be trusted to a carved piece of wood. The Empire's true scar had been found, and now it was time to press the wound. The catacombs beneath the obsidian city were not tunnels, but ancient, forgotten arteries. The original sewers and waterworks of the Pilus civilization, sealed off and entombed when the Seraphim dynasty took power. They were cold, damp, and smelled of mineral water and deep earth, a perfect, neutral territory between the splendor above and the squalor below. Elara had used the secret maps she had painstakingly sketched in her youth. She slipped past the palace kitchens, through a seldom-used utility grate disguised by hanging moss, and into the suffocating darkness. She carried no lamp, only a small, heavy piece of chalcedony, a smooth, blue stone that Kael had given her years ago. It was their prearranged signal. If she was coming, she would leave the stone exactly one step inside the mouth of the main sewer exit in the lower city. She waited. The silence of the tunnel was thick and pressing, broken only by the drip of subterranean water. Every shadow seemed to move, every draft felt like the breath of a guard. The parchment notes of the Desert Covenant, copied onto thin, brittle sheets, were tucked into the waist of her tunic, feeling like hot lead against her skin. Then she heard it, a sound only she knew. Not footsteps, but a deliberate drag, the sound of Kael's custom-made leather boots on the wet stone. He was moving not with stealth, but with controlled purpose. He emerged from the darkness ahead, a figure forged by hardship, lit only by the faint, diffused light filtering from a distant, cracked ventilation shaft. His eyes found hers instantly, skipping the customary lookouts. "Elara!" His voice was a low, rough whisper, a sound she had only dreamed of hearing spoken to her directly. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgment of profound, shared danger. She took a shaky breath. Kael. They did not rush to each other. The space between them, perhaps 10 feet of damp stone, was the distance of their entire lives. The vast, unbridgeable chasm between the God Emperor's court and the unmarked resistance. He saw her first. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands, the tension in her posture, the fear that she had learned to camouflage perfectly in the palace. He saw the woman who risked execution for a truth she couldn't even grasp yet. She saw him. She saw the new scar that traced his jawline, the weariness that deepened the lines around his eyes, and the knife that was strapped not just to his belt, but woven into the philosophy he carried. He was magnificent in his defiance, but tragically real in his exhaustion. Finally, Kael took the first step, closing the gap. He did not embrace her. He lifted his hand and gently touched the side of her face, his thumb brushing away a speck of dust that had settled there. It was a gesture of such simple, unexpected tenderness that it broke the carefully constructed dam of her composure. "You should not have risked this," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, searching for injuries, or worse, for surveillance. "I had to," Elara insisted, her voice tight. "The wood, the symbols aren't enough for this." She reached for the notes and pulled them out, the rustle of the parchment loud in the cavern. "Kael, the Empire is built on a lie. A historical, provable fraud." He took the sheets from her, his fingers brushing hers, a contact that sent a devastating jolt through them both. He unrolled the brittle paper and held it up to the faint light. As he read the copied text of the Desert Covenant, the promise of shared power, the rights of the nomadic tribes, the illegal seizure of the Pilus waterworks, the blood seemed to drain from his face. "The rotating council, the water rights," Kael whispered, the words tasting like ash. "All this time, we have fought for freedom. But the ancestors fought for law. We aren't rebels, Elara. We are citizens fighting to enforce an ancient, binding decree." He looked at the parchment as if it were a map to a treasure more valuable than gold, a map to legitimacy. "They didn't just conquer us," Elara said, her voice rising with furious realization. "They stole the foundation of our world. The ziggurat, the aqueducts, the very claim of the God Emperor. It's all based on a treaty they betrayed 400 years ago." The strategic discussion shifted suddenly to the deeply personal. Kael set the parchment on a stone ledge and turned back to Elara. "This changes everything," he said, not referring to the resistance. He was speaking of her danger. "If they ever find this on you, the general won't just kill you. He'll make you disappear into the obsidian scar itself. You have to leave. Now. Come with me." The offer was everything she had ever dreamed of and everything she knew she couldn't accept. "And do what?" Elara challenged, her eyes wet but fiercely determined. "Live in the desert, knowing that the most powerful truth of our time is buried in my skirts? No. I am the only one who can get you the rest of the information. I know the palace. I know the rotation of the guards. I know the general's obsessions. I am your blade inside the sheath. Kael closed the final inch between them, his hands cupping her face. The rough fabric of his clothes against her silk-soft tunic was a metaphor for their impossible bond. "You are my life, Elara," he said, his voice raw with a pain that went beyond politics. "And I will not trade your life for a quick victory. If the Empire falls, I want you standing next to me, not hiding outside the walls." "Then you must let me do this," she pleaded, reaching up to grip his wrists. "Every moment you waste worrying about me is a moment the Empire solidifies its lie. I am not a helpless weaver, Kael. I am the daughter of a court servant who walks the corridors of power. I belong there, until the moment I am no longer useful." In that moment, their love ceased to be merely romantic. It became a crucible, a forge where personal sacrifice was hammered into political strategy. He saw the strength in her argument, and the terrifying, cold logic of her self-sacrifice. Kael leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. For a long, silent beat, they were simply Elara and Kael, two people desperately in love, separated by a wall of their own creation, a necessary wall of secrecy and risk. Then he kissed her. It was not a tender kiss of longing, but a desperate, furious claim, a promise of fidelity and a silent oath that if one fell, the other would carry their combined mission forward. It tasted of salt and subterranean water, of fear and absolute commitment. When they finally broke apart, the air around them felt charged and dangerous. "Take the scrolls," Elara whispered, pushing the parchments into his hand. "Memorize them. Disseminate them. Do not use the word rebel. Use the word restoration. You are restoring the law." Kael nodded, tucking the covenant deep into his tunic. "I understand. And you keep mapping the weakness. The physical scar of the Pilus waterworks. That will be the key to bringing this dynasty to its knees." He reached into his pocket and placed the carved almond blossom back into her hand. "Hope," he said simply. "Until I see you again." He turned and dissolved into the shadows, leaving her alone once more in the echoing silence of the catacombs, standing on the edge of treason, armed with a piece of wood and an ancient truth. Elara knew, standing there, that the game had moved past sentiment. They were no longer children playing by a gate. They were architects of the Empire's doom. The salt mines of the Seraphim were a monument to brutality, a vast, blinding white expanse located a fortnight's march from the capital. Here, those deemed enemies of the state, the slow, the dissenting, the unmarked, labored until their lungs failed and their skin cracked. It was the Empire's slow-motion execution chamber. Kael's elder scribe had convinced the Obsidian Hand that their first action must not be against the palace itself, but against the Empire's conscience, if such a thing existed. The liberation of the salt mines would be a moral victory that would galvanize the scattered tribes and demonstrate the Restoration's commitment to the oppressed. But to breach the mines, Kael needed the physical blueprints and the precise shift schedule of the Praetorian garrison. This information resided within the heavily secured General's Tower, the domain of General Valerius. Elara's world narrowed to a tunnel of fear. She was now not just a spy, but a thief, a saboteur. She was given the impossible task of obtaining maps from the office of the man who obsessed over her every gesture. General Valerius's office was not extravagant. It was ruthlessly efficient, a shrine to cold logic. The wall behind his desk was a massive relief map of the entire Seraphim territory, detailing every garrison, every water tower, and every labor camp. The salt mines were marked by a small, unremarkable ruby stud. Elara utilized her status as a commissioned artisan. She requested access to the tower's storage to verify the precise weave count of the general's ceremonial carpets, a ridiculously minor task designed to bore the guards into inattention. It took her 3 sleepless nights to execute the plan. Night 1. She memorized the rhythmic clank-shuffle-clank of the late-night sentry patrol. She discovered the exact window of time, 4 minutes and 20 seconds, between the patrol turning the east corner and the secondary guard checking the main stairwell. Night 2. She used a highly concentrated form of oil from her weaving studio, scented with rare palace incense, to subtly grease the inner latch of a seldom-used supply door 2 corridors from Valerius's office. The scent would mask the oil, and the grease would prevent the latch from sealing fully. Night 3. She made her move. Wearing a simple, dark tunic, moving with the preternatural silence learned from years of secret meetings, she slipped out. The 4-minute window felt like 4 seconds. She reached the supplied door, pressed a simple, iron-hooked needle, one used for complex embroidery, into the greased latch, and with a soft click, the lock yielded. She was inside the general's tower. Valerius's office was dark, illuminated only by the faint light of the distant twin moons filtering through the high, slit windows. She bypassed the scrolls on his desk, knowing they were decoy traps. The real maps were always locked in the archive chest, a massive, iron-bound trunk beneath the relief map. She did not have a key. But she had something better, the knowledge that Valerius was a man of logic. The lock was complex, a set of rotating tumblers. She knew he would not trust the key to a servant, and he would not risk losing it. He would use a code that meant something to him. What was the one thing General Valerius believed in more than the Emperor? Historical precedent. Elara ran her fingers over the tumblers. She tried the official date of the Seraphim founding, failed. She tried the date of the last great military victory, failed. Then she remembered her terrifying interview with him in the atelier. You understand the true cost of deviation. A scar in the perfection. She punched in the coordinates of the most significant defeat the Empire had ever suffered, an ancient skirmish that the official history had purged but that General Valerius, the student of war, would never forget. The tumblers thunked. The heavy lock sprang open. Inside, beneath layers of official seals, were the garrison rosters and the crystalline schematics of the salt mines. Elara's hands moved with frantic precision, copying only the essentials onto a tiny strip of parchment. The single underground tunnel, the changing of the guard at 0400, the weak point in the ventilation shafts. She sealed the chest, spun the tumblers to a random setting, and slid back into the silence. She was out of the tower and back in her room before the main patrol returned. The total time elapsed 8 minutes and 5 seconds. She had gambled and won. But the price of winning was a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. The next night, the exchange was brief and desperate. Kael waited at a broken-down well outside the city's lesser wall. Elara, feigning an errand for medicine, met him. She handed him the small, rolled parchment. It was her soul made manifest. "The weak point is the southern vent," she breathed, her exhaustion making her shaky. "The garrison changes at 0400. There are exactly 6 sentries posted in the eastern corridor for 7 minutes. Kael's eyes devoured the parchment. He looked up at her, his face a mask of solemn resolve. He knew she had risked everything. "I will not forget this sacrifice," he vowed. He placed his rough hand over her heart, a silent contract. "If the winds change, and I cannot return to the city, you will hear a single, high-pitched horn call at sunset 3 days from now. If you hear it, it means success. If you hear nothing, you must protect yourself." Then he was gone, dissolved into the desert night, carrying the blueprint for his revolution and the key to Elara's ruin. Elara returned to the atelier. For the next 3 days, she lived in a state of exquisite torture. She wove a simple black border, but her internal world was a kaleidoscope of flashing blades and dying screams. Every time she heard a military boot outside, her body tensed, preparing for a rest. She ate little. She slept less. General Valerius was more vigilant than ever, sensing the subtle tremor in the court, though he could not place the source. On the 3rd day, a massive, unscheduled military convoy thundered out of the city gates toward the salt mines. The official word was that they were reinforcing the guard against an increased risk of desert bandit activity. Elara knew the truth. The general was nervous. He was preempting something he hadn't yet identified. The siege was on. That evening, Elara stood on the highest point she could find, a small, dusty viewing balcony reserved for the emperor's servants. The sun sank beneath the obsidian city, turning the sky into a furnace of red and purple, the same colors that marked her birth. Silence. Only the distant, mechanical hum of the aqueducts. No horn. The minutes dragged into an hour. The official curfew horn blew, a low, mournful sound from the Imperial Guard. Then, just as the last sliver of sun vanished, plunging the world into darkness, a different sound sliced through the night. It was sharp, clear, and carried on the desert wind, the high, piercing, triumphant single horn call. Success. Elara sank against the cold stone railing, tears finally streaming down her face. Kael had done it. Thousands of the unmarked were free, marching out of the imperial death camp toward a new life under the protection of the desert tribes. The salt mines were empty. But her relief was short-lived. The next morning, the official decree arrived. The Empire did not acknowledge a rebellion or an escape. It reported a devastating desert scourge that had attacked the mines, claiming that all prisoners were tragically lost in the ensuing chaos. The Empire could not afford to look weak. It would twist truth into tragedy. And then, General Valerius walked into the atelier, his face set in a look of controlled, lethal fury. He didn't speak to Elara. He walked straight to Elara, stopping a foot from her loom, his eyes like chips of flint. "The salt mine rosters," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "The rotation schedule. They were precise, Elara. Too precise for common bandits." He did not accuse her. He simply watched her hands, which were now weaving a new tapestry, a scene of imperial mourning for the lost lives. "The lock on my archive chest was not broken," Valerius continued, his stare relentless. "It was misaligned. Someone with intimate knowledge of my philosophies was in that room. Someone who knew the importance of our defeats." Elara met his gaze, her heart beating the rhythm of a funeral drum. She had to weave the lie. "General," she said, her voice full of feigned sympathy, "that is a terrifying security lapse. But as you can see, I was here, weaving the mourning banners, as I have been every night." Valerius did not believe her. But he did not have proof. He saw the perfection of her work, the calculated calmness of her eyes, and a terrifying realization settled over him. The person he sought was not a panicked fool. They were an intelligence equal to his own. "We shall see," Valerius muttered, his control barely holding. He turned away, leaving her with the weight of his suspicion, a burden far heavier than any chain. Elara continued to weave the black thread of official mourning, knowing that she had now crossed the line of no return. She was deeply, fatally, implicated in the restoration. The Empire had its scar, and she was the needle that was sewing it deeper. General Valerius was, by nature, a perfectionist of control. His mind was a vast, cold citadel, and the salt mine's breach was not merely a defeat, it was a hairline fracture in the foundation of his self-concept. He did not feel panic, he felt a terrifying, white-hot intellectual rage. He stood before his massive relief map, staring at the ruby stud that marked the now empty salt mines. The official explanation, a desert scourge, was a lie meant for the ears of the God Emperor and the ignorant public. Valerius knew the truth. The attack was not only precise but surgical. The enemy had possessed schematics, shift changes, and most damningly, the correct timing. He dismissed the Praetorian analysts. They spoke of common traitors, bribed guards, or smuggled codes. Valerius knew better. This required something more profound, something structural. He began his investigation not with suspects, but with possibilities. He returned to his office safe, examining the archive chest lock. The fact that the tumblers had been spun back to a random setting was a detail that clawed at his meticulous mind. A panicked thief would have left it unlocked or simply broken. A professional would have reset the correct code. But this traitor reset it to random. A display of arrogance? Valerius pondered, running a gloved finger over the cold iron. No. A display of confidence. They were moving so quickly, they didn't even care to remember my key. He isolated the key moment, the use of the ancient, forgotten defeat as the code. Only 3 people in the entire Seraphim administration knew that event by its historical date and importance: the chief scribe, Valerius himself, and the woman who studied the tapestry history. Valerius summoned Elara back to his office, not under the pretense of a security inquiry, but a casual, disarming conversation. He dismissed his attendants, leaving only the 2 of them in the chilling silence. He offered her a glass of chilled, sweetened spring water, a rare treat. Elara accepted it with a steady hand, a subtle show of composure that did not escape him. "Elara," he began, settling into his massive oak chair. "The recent incident has proven that the art of history is not merely decorative. You, as a weaver of history, understand the power of pattern recognition." "I try to, General," she replied, her voice soft. "Tell me," he pressed, watching her eyes for the slightest flicker of guilt. "If you were to create a perfect deception, a flawless lie woven into the fabric of truth, where would you place the single, tiny thread that could unravel the entire piece?" Elara took a slow sip of water. She felt the weight of his gaze, the cold precision of his question. This was not a conversation. It was a mental duel with her life as the prize. "The lie must be hidden," she said, choosing her words carefully, speaking with the authority of her craft. "But it must also be necessary. If you remove the lie, the whole pattern collapses. Therefore, the thread must be placed where everyone expects to see its opposite, the absolute foundation of the design." She paused, looking directly at him. "The Emperor's history," she concluded. "If the official lineage tapestry were found to have a flaw in its founding myth, every victory woven after it becomes suspect." Valerius leaned back, a genuine, if brief, flicker of admiration in his eyes. He had expected fear, tears, or protestation. He received an elegant lecture on treason. "An excellent analysis," he conceded. "But you speak of abstract tapestry. I speak of the present. The salt mines. Someone provided information. I need to find the deviation." He then changed his approach, shifting from the grand, strategic lie to the intimate, personal detail. "I have observed your mother, Elara. A woman of intense loyalty, but average intellect. Your knowledge of history and strategic movements is remarkable. Did she teach you the importance of defeats?" Elara knew exactly what he was asking. She knew she had to admit to knowledge he already suspected, but shift the source. "No, General. My mother taught me only the perfection of the present design. But I learned of defeats from the ancient scribes in the archives. I had permission to trace the lineages. The scribes speak more freely when they believe they are only talking to a child who copies names. They lament that a victory only holds meaning when the taste of a great defeat is also remembered. It is a lesson in power." It was a beautiful lie, plausible, traceable, and cleverly deflecting suspicion onto a collective, anonymous group that Valerius couldn't easily interrogate. Valerius stared at her, absorbing the answer. The scribe's silence, the historical knowledge, the precision of her logic, it all aligned with the mystery of the archived chest lock. It was possible. But Valerius did not deal in possibility. he dealt in certainty. He stood up and walked to his map, pointing to the location of the breach. The information that breached the mine was practical, not historical. Who would you choose, Elara, to trust with the details of that escape? Someone with flawless loyalty, or someone with flawless courage? In a revolution, Elara said, setting down her water glass, her hands finally still. Courage is loyalty, General. Because the greatest loyalty a person can have is not to an empire, but to a belief. And beliefs demand action. The philosophical weight of her statement hung in the air. Valerius realized he was no longer interrogating a potential suspect. He was speaking to a peer, a mind that understood the levers of power as well as he did. After she left, Valerius did not call the guards. He did not issue an order for her arrest. He sat back at his desk, and a slow, deep breath escaped him. She is the flaw in the pattern, he thought. She is the only one. But he had no proof. Just a theory based on intellect. And the general was a man who craved intellectual challenge more than anything else. He realized the terrifying truth. If Elara was the traitor, she was not working for money or vengeance. She was working for the belief she had just described. She saw the empire as fundamentally flawed. Valerius was struck by a perverse realization. He admired her. Her audacity, her precision, her capacity for calculated risk. It was everything he respected in a military mind. To arrest her without proof would be to destroy the most interesting intellectual adversary he had ever encountered. He stood up and walked to the wall where her mother's tapestry, the one with the subtle, treasonous symbol, still hung in the secondary hall. He traced the symbol with his thumb. The traitor was an artist. The traitor was a historian. The traitor was a master of logic. The pursuit ceased to be about justice. It became about possession. He had to prove she was the traitor, not to execute her, but to understand her, to recruit her, to conquer her mind. He wanted that defiant, brilliant light brought under his absolute control. He spent the next weeks having his servants plant subtle, complex decoys, false schedules, incorrect logistics documents, and misleading historical scrolls, all within easy reach of the tapestry studios and the archives. He wasn't trying to catch the enemy. He was laying intellectual bait for Elara, hoping she would make a mistake that betrayed her thought process, not her guilt. Valerius was now playing a dual game, serving the emperor with a show of ruthless efficiency, while quietly trying to win the greatest prize of all, the mind of Elara. He was weaving his own tapestry of suspicion, with Elara as the central, terrifyingly beautiful figure, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the scar he knew she held in her heart. The lower city, beneath the serene facade of the Seraphim capital, was not a slum. It was a complex organism, a society functioning entirely on the principles the empire had outlawed: mutual aid, shared resources, and absolute autonomy. It was a city carved from necessity, illuminated by stolen sparks and fueled by collective rage. Kael's life was defined by the transition from angry boy to dedicated leader. He still carried the scent of the high desert, a heritage of freedom he had never personally experienced, but he was a master of the tunnels, navigating the dark, damp passages with an innate sense of direction. His mentor was the elder scribe, Master Theron. Theron was a living paradox, a man steeped in the Empire's own literature and military texts, yet absolutely committed to its downfall. He ran a school of resistance, teaching the unmarked not how to fight with brute force, but with the cold, patient logic of history. The meeting place of the Obsidian Hand was deep in the ancient Pilus waterworks, a cavernous, dry cistern known simply as the Well of Echoes. Here, in the damp darkness, Kael received his education. The Seraphim will only be defeated by their own arrogance, Kael, Theron would teach, tracing complex diagrams in the dust with a long, thin stick. They believe their power is divinely given and therefore immutable. They plan for wars against armies, not against ideas. Your job is to make their arrogance their weapon against them. Theron's lessons were exhaustive. Logistics of necessity, how to purify stolen water with charcoal, how to create low-smoke fires, how to use the sewer system for communication lines. Psychology of power, the difference between a general who leads from the front, Valerius, and an emperor who rules from the sanctuary, God Emperor. The scent of fear. When the empire is strong, it is silent. When it is afraid, it overcompensates with excessive force and public displays. Kael, the natural carver, learned to apply his craft to leadership. Just as he sculpted a piece of raw wood, he learned to sculpt the raw emotion of the oppressed into a cohesive, focused force. He found that the people of the lower city did not need rousing speeches. They needed proof of a viable path. The Obsidian Hand was meticulously structured, deliberately mirroring the efficiency of the Empire to exploit its familiarity. The scribes, led by Theron, they managed all intelligence, coded language, and historical documentation, the very history Elara was helping them complete. The runners, mostly teenagers and elderly people, they used their seeming invisibility to move resources, messages, and small items between the hidden pockets of the lower city and the distant desert tribes. The Breakers, Kael's unit. They were the action unit, specializing in silent infiltration and sabotage, never brute force. Their targets were always strategic: communication lines, water pump mechanisms, minor tax collection points. The greatest challenge facing Kael was not the Empire's strength, but the Unmarked's own deep-seated fatigue. For centuries of oppression had bred a culture of quiet desperation. Why fight? A weary woman named Lyra, a mother of two who risked starvation daily, challenged him during one assembly. Every generation fights. Every generation dies. The wall is black and it is eternal. Kael did not offer empty promises. He held up the leather-bound scroll of the Desert Covenant, the truth Elara had delivered. We do not fight for a fleeting victory, Kael said, his voice echoing powerfully in the cistern. We fight because they stole our law. This document proves the Seraphim are not divine rulers. They are trespassers. We are not rebels trying to destroy order. We are citizens attempting to restore it. This concept, restoration, not rebellion, was the ideological fuel that finally caught fire in the hearts of the Unmarked. It gave their suffering historical dignity and legal backing. Theron, seeing the shift in Kael's confidence after the salt mine's liberation, Segment 9, began to prepare him for the leadership's true burden. One evening, Theron led Kael away from the Well of Echoes, down an unmarked shaft, to a chamber so old the air was almost stale. In the center of the floor was a massive, circular depression, dry and dusty. "This," Theron whispered, gesturing to the circle, "is where the Pilus Aqueduct control system used to sit. The true heart of this city." He revealed a series of small, intricate mechanisms carved into the stone of the floor. Levers, pipes, and valves, all sealed off with black obsidian cement. "The Seraphim didn't just seize the water," Theron explained. "They sealed off the ability to redirect it. They want the water flowing only where they decide. But the Pilus were masters of flux. Their system could redirect the flow to any section of the city, or, if necessary, cut it off entirely." Theron placed his hand on the obsidian seal. "Beneath this seal, Kael, is the greatest weapon against the Seraphim. The ultimate leverage. The ability to make the obsidian city thirsty. If we break the seal," Kael asked, his mind racing through the tactical implications, "we can flood the lower city, or cut the Emperor's palace." "Precisely," Theron confirmed. "But the seals are complex. They can only be bypassed by knowing the original Pilus design, the true schematics that show the stress points and the counter mechanisms. The Seraphim purged every copy of those schematics when they took power. They are likely in one place only, the deepest, most secure archives of the God Emperor." Kael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. The ultimate weapon was locked away, behind the perfect black walls, guarded by the very man who obsessed over his ally. He looked at the sealed control system. This was the ultimate challenge Elara would have to face. Her current mapping of the palace was not enough. She had to locate the Pilus schematics, a map to the Empire's lifeblood, and risk her life to get them to him. "I understand," Kael said, the resolve in his voice now cold and steely. "The salt mines were the body of the rebellion. The Covenant is the soul. But the Pilus schematics, that is the weapon." He left the Well of Echoes with a renewed, terrible sense of clarity. He was leading a restoration that needed a full military-grade intelligence operation to succeed. He was the force on the outside, preparing the army. Elara was the mind on the inside, preparing the strategy. He touched the hidden spot on his tunic where the Covenant rested, a symbol of her sacrifice. He would not fail. He could not. The fate of both worlds, the light and the shadow, now rested on the frail thread of their forbidden alliance. The Seraphim Empire was preparing for its quadrennial jubilee, a spectacle designed to celebrate 400 years of the God Emperor's divine rule, the exact time frame. Elara knew, since the betrayal of the Desert Covenant. The centerpiece of the celebration was to be the tapestry of unbroken dominion, a massive, shimmering curtain that would hang behind the imperial throne. Mistress Illyria and Elara, her most talented apprentice, were given the honor of the commission. The stakes were no longer about artistry. They were about survival. General Valerius, in his chillingly subtle campaign to verify Elara's treason, ensured that he was the tapestry's chief overseer. He wanted to see how the mind that betrayed his trust would handle the ultimate test of loyalty. The tapestry's official design was simple, a central image of the god emperor, flanked by the eternal symbols of the empire, the golden hawk, the black river, the unblemished sun, flawless. Perfect. But Elara was weaving two tapestries, the one visible to the court, and the one woven in code for Kael. Valerius visited the atelier daily, his presence an oppressive blanket. He never mentioned the salt mines, only the philosophical importance of the tapestry. "We are creating the narrative, Elara," he would say, pacing the polished floor. "A perfect representation of the truth. If you introduce ambiguity, you introduce doubt. Doubt is the true enemy." Elara's challenge was immense. She had to weave a subtle, treasonous symbol into the foundation of the tapestry, the single thread that validated the restoration's claim, without alerting the keen, educated eye of Valerius. She chose the foundation of the tapestry's border. The official design called for a repeating pattern of the Black River, signifying absolute imperial power. Beneath the river, in the lowest corner of the fringe, Elara began her insertion. She wove the standard black thread, but in a section that would be easily concealed by the throne's shadow, she made a tiny, calculated substitution. She used a rare, almost microscopic thread dyed with pilus blue, a shade derived from a mineral found only in the ancient pilus waterworks. It was chemically identical to the seraphim's official deep indigo, but woven in a specific, forgotten pilus knot pattern. The pattern itself was the key. It was not a recognizable symbol, but a complex, non-repeating knot sequence that Kael, having studied the history of the pilus engineers under Theron, would instantly recognize as the pilus cipher, a hidden signature that signaled the location of their foundational knowledge. It was a single, 3-inch line, obscured by the heavier border and the natural fall of the cloth. It was the perfect, necessary lie she had described to Valerius. Remove the pilus blue thread, and the border would not unravel, but the historical truth woven into the empire's greatest lie would vanish. Valerius watched, hawk-like. He had his own tests prepared. One afternoon, he brought her a small sample of red desert ochre, a rich, violet color derived from iron-rich sand, the symbolic color of the desert tribes. "I need you to weave a band of this ochre into the fringe," Valerius commanded. "It will signify the wild, untamed lands that the seraphim have mastered and contained. Do you understand the message, Elara?" Mastery. This was a direct bait. Weaving the color of the unmarked into the tapestry was a visual act of acknowledgement. If Elara wove it poorly, it could betray her contempt. If she wove it perfectly, it could betray her secret sympathy. Elara took the ochre. She decided to treat it with the same respect she would the Emperor's gold. She wove the band flawlessly, giving the raw, aggressive color a stunning geometric border of imperial gold, showing the containment he desired. But she made one subtle choice. She used the ochre thread to weave a single, perfect 3-pronged knot, the pilus symbol for shared water source, and then immediately covered it with the gold thread. It was visible only under extreme scrutiny, a flicker of resistance hidden beneath the sheen of imperial domination. Valerius stared at the completed section for nearly 10 minutes. He didn't blink. He was searching for any imperfection in the tension of the thread, any hesitation in the stitch. He ran his hand over the ochre and the surrounding gold. "You have given the wildness a proper prison, Elara," he conceded, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Your hands are loyal, even if your mind is contemplative." He found no flaw. But he left the atelier more certain than ever that she was the one. Her perfection itself was the only thing that kept her safe. She was so skilled at weaving the lie that he could not find the truth. The night before the Jubilee, Elara had one final, desperate task. Kael needed to know exactly where to look on the gargantuan tapestry to find her code. She couldn't risk another shadow meeting. She found her solution in the palace's most visible weakness, the imperial standard-bearer's robe. The robe, which would be worn by a ceremonial guard during the procession, had a massive, flowing train that dragged along the ground beneath the throne. Elara claimed the robe needed a last-minute repair to its hem. As she worked, she found a moment alone. Using a single strand of white silk, the color of truth and surrender, she stitched a nearly invisible line on the innermost layer of the train. The line traced a path from the robe's hemline upward, pointing directly toward the tapestry's lowest left corner, where the pilous blue cipher was hidden. The line was meant not for a guard, but for Kael. She knew that the obsidian hand would have eyes inside the procession, dressed as servants, or even street vendors. She was giving them a compass pointing to the truth. The day of the Jubilee was a blinding spectacle of power. 10,000 Praetorians stood at attention. The ziggurat smoked with ceremonial sacrifices. And in the center of it all, hanging behind the immense obsidian throne, was the tapestry of unbroken dominion. Elara stood among the royal weavers, watching the ceremony with a terror that felt like paralysis. The procession began. The standard-bearer, a massive, unthinking man, shuffled down the hall. The train of his robe, with its single, tiny line of treasonous white silk, dragged perfectly toward the throne. The standard-bearer reached the throne and took his position. The train of his robe settled exactly as Elara had hoped, the white line disappearing under the fold of the tapestry's hem, pointing directly to the hidden pilous blue cipher. Then came the moment of highest peril. The god emperor arrived and took his seat. The crowd roared. But Valerius was not watching the emperor. He was watching Elara. As the emperor settled, the train of the robe was briefly jostled by a nearby attendant. The tiny white line, Elara's compass to truth, flashed into view for a split second, pointing toward the corner. Valerius's eyes narrowed, not at the line itself, which he likely mistook for a stray thread, but at the brief, infinitesimal wince of fear that crossed Elara's face. In that instant, Valerius knew. He had the proof, not of the thread, but of the emotional betrayal. He understood that Elara had been communicating in secret. He just didn't know the content. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply gave her a slow, terrifying, private nod of recognition, a silent, chilling vow that her game was now over. Elara knew she was exposed. The tapestry was a success, the code was in place, but her protection was gone. She had confirmed Valerius's greatest suspicion. She was a weapon of incredible intelligence, and she was aimed directly at the heart of the empire. The tapestry hung behind the emperor, a gorgeous, magnificent lie. And in its shadow, two minds, Elara's and Valerius's, began the final, fatal game of cat and mouse. The jubilee was a triumph of spectacle, a dazzling display that momentarily hypnotized the obsidian city into believing in the Empire's eternal power. But for Elara, the grand hall was a chamber of certain doom. She stood rigid, surrounded by the adulation of the court, feeling General Valerius's eyes on her like a physical weight. Valerius did not wait. He was a man of cold efficiency, recognizing that delayed reaction was a greater danger than open accusation. He moved with the precision of a predator closing a trap. The very next morning, the chief scribe, Master Lyron, Elara's silent ally from the archives, was arrested on charges of treason and negligence. Valerius framed the charge not around the Desert Covenant, the truth Elara had stolen, but around a subtle, fabricated, misdirection of a tax scroll. The move was brilliant. It was a clear, brutal message to Elara. I know the source of the leak is in the archives, and I am cutting off your line of retreat. It also eliminated the only other person with the historical knowledge to fully understand her pilot cipher. Valerius then personally took charge of the royal archives, bringing his own team of loyal, non-reading Praetorian guards. His focus, however, remained on the tapestry. He summoned Elara to the Grand Hall again, this time with a single attendant, a scribe named Joris, whose terrified face showed he was there to document, not to assist. The vast, empty hall magnified the oppressive quiet. The God Emperor's throne was vacant, and the tapestry of unbroken dominion hung like a colossal banner of judgment. Valerius dismissed Joris to the far end of the hall. He and Elara were alone with the tapestry. "It is a masterpiece, Elara," Valerius stated, walking toward the lowest left corner, where the imperial standard-bearer's robe had rested. "The artistry is beyond reproach. You have woven a story that will last 1,000 years." He knelt down, an act unbefitting his rank, and ran his gloved hand over the thick, braided fringe. He ignored the visible knots. His focus was on the subtle distortions. "But perfection, Elara, is a tedious thing. It begs for the introduction of a deliberate human flaw." He found the single, 3-inch line of pilous blue, almost hidden by the overlay of the official Black River. He did not touch it. He merely pointed his index finger at the spot. "Tell me, young mistress," he asked, his voice low, intimate, and lethally calm. "What is this thread? It is not the dye we authorized. It has a different mineral composition. It has a strange, non-repeating knot." Elara's mind raced. Denial was useless. He had already done the chemical test. Her only defense was to transform the treason into a confession of minor, understandable hubris. "General," Elara began, keeping her eyes fixed on his. "It is my signature. A personal mark. The ancient weavers believed that leaving a tiny, private flaw preserved the soul of the artisan from the fate of the art. I used the mineral blue from the old quarry where my family worked, a sentimental attachment. The knot is merely an old, family pattern. Valerius rose slowly, towering over her. Sentiment, Elara, is the first indulgence of a traitor. And sentiment that coincidentally involves the forgotten dyes of the unmarked ancestors and a knot system that is not seraphim, that is not a flaw. It is a key. He knew she was lying, but her lie was strategically brilliant. It gave him no legal cause for execution, only for banishment or censure, but it confirmed his absolute certainty of her guilt. The truth is, Valerius continued, stepping closer until the air between them crackled with unspoken hostility. You placed a code in the heart of the Empire's greatest symbol. A code meant to be read by the enemy. A code that, if translated, will lead them to what they truly seek. He did not wait for her to break. He simply delivered his ultimatum, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I know what you are, Elara. You are the architect of this unrest. But I will not destroy you. You are too valuable. I will not give the Emperor a public spectacle of your treason. He gestured to the vast, opulent hall around them. I want to know what this key unlocks. I will keep your secret, and you will become my analyst. You will use that magnificent mind to anticipate the enemy's move, the enemy being Kael, the man with the desert dust on his boots. Elara was stunned. This was not the execution she had prepared for. It was a far more terrifying fate, forced collaboration. If I refuse, Elara managed, her throat dry. Valerius merely smiled, a cold, empty expression. If you refuse, Elara, I will execute your mother and every member of the royal weavers as collaborators. I will find Kael myself, using the resources you denied me. And when I do, I will ensure he is captured, not killed, so he may spend the rest of his life watching the slow, agonizing destruction of the lower city, a fate you ensured by protecting him. He leaned in, his final words the weight of the entire empire. You will serve me, Elara. And you will prove that your loyalty to the idea of freedom is secondary to your loyalty to human life, the lives of those you claim to protect. You are mine now. Elara had no choice. She was trapped in the most agonizing crucible imaginable, serving her greatest enemy to protect her loved ones, while continuing to serve her true purpose through the veil of her obedience. I will serve you, General, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. But I will not betray the principles of history. I will anticipate the enemy's moves based on logic and historical precedent, not on my sentiments. Logic is all I require. Valerius confirmed, his victory complete. He had conquered her mind without spilling a drop of blood. You will begin immediately. You will tell me what the Obsidian Hand's next move will be, based on the success of the salt mine's liberation and the information they now possess. You will tell me how to stop them. He gave her a final, commanding look. Welcome to the true center of the Empire, Elara. Now tell me about the pilot's schematics. Elara gasped, unable to conceal her shock. He hadn't just discovered her code, he had guessed its target. He was not merely intelligent. He was telepathic in his understanding of power. She realized the crushing truth. The man who loved the Empire's logic was hunting the man who embodied the desert's passion. And she, Elara, was the only thing standing between them, forced to serve both sides, praying that her intelligence could save Kael while satisfying Valerius. She was now officially inducted into her new life, a prisoner with privilege, a traitor with a desk, serving a general who wanted to possess her brilliant mind more than he wanted to destroy her. The war had just become terrifyingly personal. Elara's life now resembled a flawless, intricate cage of polished brass. She was installed in a small, well-appointed office adjacent to General Valerius's own, furnished with maps, historical documents, and the finest imperial parchment. She was no longer a weaver. She was a strategist, working on the side of her executioner. The first 3 weeks were a psychological gauntlet. Valerius spoke in riddles, testing her loyalty with hypothetical scenarios. He never asked, "Where is Kael?" He asked, "If you were the leader of the Restoration, what target of psychological importance would you choose, following the liberation of the salt mines?" Elara knew the answer, the pilot schematics. Kael needed the weapon, but she couldn't give him that. She had to weave a complex strategic misdirection, a tapestry of false logic that was compelling enough to satisfy Valerius's demanding intellect, yet safely distant from the truth. "General," Elara began one afternoon, standing before a large, unlabeled map of the Seraphim territories. The attack on the salt mines was a moral victory, designed to recruit followers. The Restoration knows they cannot win a frontal assault. They need to turn the populace against the Emperor. And how does one accomplish that? Valerius challenged, his obsidian eyes never leaving her face. By attacking the Empire's sense of security. Elara explained, channeling the logic she knew Theron and Kael embraced. The people looked to the Empire for absolute protection from chaos. A psychological target must be chosen that is highly visible, easily infiltrated, and ultimately, minor in strategic loss, but massive in popular terror. She tapped a point on the map far from the city. The Imperial grain storage vaults near the southern passes. They are heavily guarded, but the defenses are designed for bandit armies, not infiltration specialists. The Restoration will strike there. They will destroy a symbol of abundance, causing fear of famine, and then they will disappear, creating the perception that the Empire cannot even feed its loyal citizens. Valerius stared at the map. The logic was cold, sound, and based on classical siege psychology. It was a perfect analysis. It was also a lie. Kael was nowhere near the southern passes. Why not the city's water supply? Valerius pressed. That is the ultimate vulnerability. Too absolute. Elara countered quickly. If they cut off the water, the chaos is immediate, the military reaction is overwhelming, and they lose the support of the moderate unmarked who still live near the periphery. They are not suicidal, General. They are building a consensus for restoration. Valerius remained silent for a long minute. He knew, intellectually, that the logic was sound. He also knew, instinctually, that Elara was withholding the final, critical piece of information. But her arguments were too perfect to dismiss. He finally nodded. Prepare a tactical deployment plan for the southern grain passes. You will draft the orders for the 3rd and 7th Legions. Elara had won the first round. She was now actively commanding the Seraphim military, directing them away from Kael and the true strategic objective. The forced proximity created a bizarre intimacy between the two adversaries. Valerius often discussed history with her, not to trap her, but to genuinely debate strategy. He respected her mind profoundly. You speak of beliefs, Elara. Valerius mused one evening, reviewing a document detailing the execution of a petty thief. Your Kael fights for the belief of a forgotten covenant. I fight for the belief of order. Do you truly believe that chaos can produce a better order than the one we have? Chaos is not the Restoration's goal, General, Elara replied, her voice steady. They fight for a just order. The Covenant promised a shared future. The Seraphim Empire delivers a controlled tyranny. The Empire views its subjects as components. Kael views them as souls. Valerius's gaze darkened. Souls die quickly without organization, Elara. We are eternal because we are organized. Your passion for this rebellion, it will destroy you. And your dedication to tyranny will destroy the Empire, she countered softly. The seed of the fall is planted not by the enemy, but by the rot within the foundation. He walked toward her, his proximity a threat. You are the rot, Elara. A beautiful, brilliant rot that is eating at the very core of my duty. He reached out and, with shocking gentleness, touched the golden chain she wore, a symbol of her new, elevated status. I protect you, not for the Emperor, but because you are the only one who truly understands the cost of order. The admiration was palpable, terrifying, and utterly devoid of romance. Valerius was obsessed with possessing her mind, not her heart. During this period, Elara maintained her secret communication with Kael through the most unlikely medium, the Imperial Guard's daily ration of fresh bread. Her mother's old chambermaid, a nervous but loyal unmarked sympathizer named Anya, worked in the main kitchen. Anya would slip Elara's brief, coded messages, written on tiny, wafer-thin slivers of cured leather, into the center of the largest loaf of bread baked for the midday officers' mess. Kael's runners would intercept the loaf as it was briefly transported through a less secure service tunnel en route to the barracks. Elara's last message was the most urgent. The general seeks the psychological target. I have pointed him south. He suspects the schematics are the true goal. The window for you to act is now. You must strike, or he will recall the legions and find the truth. She was gambling on Kael's ability to use the window of the Southern Grain Pass deployment to finally locate the pilot schematics and prepare the real strike. But Elara was not the only one playing a double game. Valerius had placed his own subtle traps. He had commissioned a complex, abstract mosaic for the floor of her office, a meaningless tangle of lines and colors, or so it seemed. While she was working on the deployment orders, he watched her. He noticed that whenever she had to calculate complex logistical distances, her foot would unconsciously trace the same specific, small curve in the mosaic pattern. He realized the curve was not random. It was the precise arc of the Pilus aqueduct as it passed beneath the lower city. Valerius waited until she left. He entered her office and, kneeling down, ran his hand over the area her foot had touched. He wasn't looking for a scratch. He was looking for the wear pattern, the subtle sign of repeated, unconscious contact. He found it. The pattern of contact perfectly matched the location of the Pilus water control seals in the lower city, which Kael had recently revealed to his leaders in Segment 4. Valerius rose, his face pale with triumphant fury. She confirmed the psychological target was the schematics, the key to the water. He had all the proof he needed. He now knew Elara was betraying him, and he knew Kael's true, terrifying objective. He could not, however, simply arrest Kael, who was out in the desert. He needed to flush him out. Valerius called for his chief of staff. "Prepare the orders. We will proceed with the grain pass deployment. But we will also prepare for the imperial wedding. It is a perfect opportunity for the enemy to strike. We will use the opportunity to strike them." He looked at Elara's empty desk, her half-finished map, and gave a slow, predatory smile. He knew the enemy's heart. He was preparing a trap that would force Kael to choose between his revolution and the life of the woman he loved. The ultimate game had begun. The announcement of the imperial wedding was a political masterstroke. Crown Prince Theron, the God Emperor's heir, was to be married to Princess Lyra, the daughter of the powerful Western governor. It was a union of blood and gold, designed to solidify the empire's crumbling internal alliances. For the Seraphim, the wedding was a celebration of continuity. For General Valerius, it was the perfect bait. A massive security lockdown was ordered, concentrating nearly every unit of the Praetorian Guard into the central districts. Valerius, however, kept his own elite cohort hidden, spread across the city's peripheral utilities and, most importantly, the 3 suspected entry points to the Pilus waterworks. He knew Kael, galvanized by Elara's misdirection, pointing him to the, now, opportunity, would use the distraction to strike at the city's true power core, the Pilus schematics and the sealed water control system. Elara was forced to attend the wedding, an elegant, agonizing fixture in the general's inner circle. She wore the rich silks of a trusted advisor, but she felt the cold weight of the chain around her neck. She had managed to smuggle one final, desperate communication to Kael. "The opportunity is real, but the security is not. The focus is on the temple. The trap is on the periphery. Do not strike the ceremony. The general knows the true objective. Target the schematics only. Avoid the waterworks." She could only hope the subtle warning, that the focus was the distraction, was enough. Meanwhile, in the labyrinthine darkness of the lower city, Kael gathered the leadership of the Obsidian Hand, the Breakers unit. They had successfully leveraged the fallout of the salt mine's liberation to gather new recruits and morale. "The Empire is celebrating its lie," Kael announced, holding the Covenant scroll. "While they feast on their illegal bounty, we will seize the one thing that proves their illegitimacy, the Pilus schematics. Tonight we move from restoration to reclamation." The plan was audacious: to use the chaos of the citywide revelry to infiltrate the forbidden sublevel of the Royal Archives, a place even Elara had not been able to enter. Target: the vault containing the original Pilus engineering documents. Entry: through the ancient, collapsed ventilation shaft near the Old North Gate, which Elara's maps had detailed as a weak point in the external wall, far from the wedding parade. Kael led the strike team himself. He knew this was the moment of no return. Success meant holding the Empire's throat. Failure meant the total, bloody collapse of the movement. The wedding ceremony began with a blinding, agonizing flash of gold and jewels. As the crown prince and princess exchanged their vows in the grand temple, Kael and his team descended into the damp, earth-smelling shaft near the north gate. The initial infiltration was textbook perfection. They moved through the abandoned foundation tunnels, navigating solely by Kael's memory of Elara's hand-drawn maps and the intricate, subtle clues she had passed him over years of carving. Every loose tile, every draft of air, was a landmark provided by his beloved. They reached the Archive's foundation wall. It was nearly 5 feet of solid, perfectly cut black obsidian. Impenetrable. The schematics vault. Darren's voice crackled over a whispered communication line. Is protected by more than stone. It is protected by faith. There are no guards on the door, Kael. There are only seals. Kael studied the stone. There was no visible lock, but a faint, almost microscopic line of deep indigo dye. The same color Elara had used to mask her treasonous Pilus blue, traced a complex, repeating pattern over the smooth obsidian. The pattern of eternity, Kael recognized, remembering an ancient story. If you break the pattern, the stone collapses inward and seals the vault forever. He reached into his pack and produced a set of specialized tools. Fine, almost invisible wires and needles, the kind used by the Pilus engineers themselves. He had spent months learning the extinct craft. He began to painstakingly separate the threads of the dye pattern, moving with the focused precision of a master carver. Back at the temple, Elara was playing her part, standing only feet from General Valerius. She watched the crowd, her hands tightly clasped. She had seen the convoy leave for the North Gate hours ago. Her heart was a drum of fear. Valerius, however, was radiating confidence. Beautiful, isn't it? He asked Elara, gesturing toward the dazzling temple. The order. The faith. It is a moment of total, unquestioning loyalty. It is a fragile beauty, General, Elara replied, her eyes scanning the faces of his silent, unmoving elite guards, positioned not toward the crowds, but toward the inner palace walls. Moments of perfect order are moments of greatest vulnerability. Valerius smiled, a thin, cruel gesture. Precisely. And the enemy will believe that if they break this moment, they break the Empire. They will aim for the symbols of the heart, thinking to cause chaos. He paused, then delivered the final, calculated blow of their psychological duel. But I do not care for chaos, Elara. I care for leverage. The true attack will not be here. It will be on the forbidden sublevel of the Archives. The enemy seeks the Pilus schematics. Elara's breath hitched. She fought with every fiber of her being not to betray Kael's exact location. "Your analysis was flawless, General," she choked out. "The enemy wants the key to the water. They are using the wedding as cover." "Indeed," Valerius confirmed, his voice deadly triumphant. "And I know the infiltration route they are using, the Old North Gate. Thank you, Elara, for showing me the vulnerability in your youth." He turned to his chief lieutenant. "Signal the third cohort. Seal the North Gate shaft. We will allow the enemy to reach the vault, but they will not leave. I want Kael alive, my friend. I want him to know that the greatest strength of the Empire is its inevitability." In the archives, Kael felt the air shift. A sudden, deep thrumming sound vibrated through the stone, the sound of the North Gate shaft collapsing, sealing his escape route. "Theron!" Kael hissed into the communicator. "We're sealed in. They knew the route." "The schematics, Kael," Theron urged, his voice frantic. "You must get the schematics. It's the only way out." Kael turned his focus back to the obsidian vault. Sweat dripped onto the stone, blurring the indigo cipher. He had no time for wires. He raised the thick, heavy shaft of the pilot's digging tool, the symbol of their restoration. "No time for careful reclamation," Kael roared to his team. "We move from law to force." He slammed the shaft against the center of the pattern of eternity. The obsidian cracked with a sound like a thunderclap. The stone door did not collapse. It swung inward, revealing a small, dry vault. And there it was, a single, clay-sealed jar. The pilot's schematics. But Kael knew the price. They were trapped, surrounded by the strongest military force in the world, in the deepest, darkest core of the Empire. He gripped the jar. He looked at the sealed entrance, knowing Valerius would be there soon. His life, and Elara's, had just been sacrificed for this ancient, brittle clay jar. He had the weapon. Now, he needed a miracle. The news of the thwarted attack on the archives spread through the palace like a cold, fatal fever. Valerius, outwardly calm but inwardly furious that Kael had escaped his net with the schematics, ordered a city-wide curfew and a brutal, systematic sweep of the lower city. Elara was in her office, translating obscure Pylosian glyphs for Valerius, when she felt a creeping dread. The Empire's retaliation was not just external, it was internal. Her mother, Mistress Elara, had been a silent, terrified witness to Elara's descent into treason. She had seen the coded tapestry, noticed the strange hours, and had felt the chilling weight of Valerius's suspicion. Elara had one simple, unwavering faith: the Empire was eternal, and defiance meant annihilation. She loved her daughter, but she loved her life more, and the illusion of safety she had spent decades building. Elara's breaking point came when she saw the guard drag her old colleague, the chief scribe Lyron, through the palace square on his way to execution. She realized that the general was a meticulous hunter, and that Elara was his primary target. If she did nothing, the Empire would destroy them both. Elara went to Valerius's headquarters, bypassing the frantic guards by appealing to the highest sense of imperial duty. She was ushered into Valerius's study. He was reviewing the tactical maps from the archives trap, his face a grim mask. "Mistress Elara," he said, his voice cold. "I have no time for tapestry questions." Elara fell to her knees, trembling, clutching a small, tarnished silver ring, an heirloom. "General, I am a loyal servant of the Eternal Sun. I serve the Order." "Then speak quickly," Valerius commanded, his impatience thin. "It is my daughter, Elara," Elara choked out, her voice a raw whisper of confession and grief. "She is the traitor. She is the one giving the information to the unmarked. I saw the patterns, the maps in her journal, the strange blue thread on the tapestry. She is blinded by foolish rebellion." She held out her most damning piece of evidence, the small, obsidian-colored diary Elara used to sketch her secret maps. "She keeps maps of the lower city, General, and details of the patrol routes. She left this in her desk." Valerius did not immediately take the diary. He simply looked at the kneeling woman, the flicker of pity quickly giving way to clinical confirmation. He had always known Elara was the source, but now he had the final, incontrovertible proof of treachery delivered by the one person who should have protected her. "Why tell me now, mistress?" Valerius asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "To save her life, General," Elara wept. "And mine. Please, she is just a girl, seduced by the wrong idea. If you take her, perhaps you can save her soul, and let me live in peace." Valerius finally took the diary. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the accurate, detailed schematics of his own military movements. He had won the final piece of his intellectual game. But the victory felt utterly desolate. "Mistress Elara," Valerius stated, his voice a pronouncement of fate. "Loyalty to the Empire demands a high price. You have done your duty. You may return to your quarters." Elara returned to her weaving chamber, physically lighter but spiritually crushed. She had chosen the Empire's cold safety over her daughter's love. She sat at her loom, attempting to weave a simple cloth, but her hands shook too violently to manage the thread. Valerius acted immediately. He needed to secure Elara before Kael could retrieve her. He sent 2 trusted, silent Praetorians to Elara's office with a message. She was to be escorted immediately to the Emperor's private library to analyze a rare Pylosian text that had just been recovered. Elara, sensing the urgency and the false premise, she knew Valerius would never allow her near newly recovered Pylosian texts, realized the trap was closing. She had minutes, perhaps seconds. She quickly grabbed 2 things: the almond blossom Kael had given her, and her small, sharp tapestry needle, now a weapon. As the guards led her through the opulent corridors, Elara's mind raced. She knew every inch of this palace. She had drawn the maps. She knew the weaknesses. The guards led her toward the southern wing, far from the public halls. As they passed a massive, ceremonial marble fountain, Elara moved. She faked a sudden, terrible cough, doubling over in distress. As the nearest guard reached out to steady her, she plunged her embroidery needle deep into the jugular vein beneath his helmet's collar. The needle was fine, swift, and effective. The guard collapsed without a sound, the blood masked by the running water of the fountain. Before the second guard could draw his sword, Elara moved with the terrifying speed of desperation. She grabbed the first guard's sword hilt, using the sudden weight to knock the second man off balance and into the fountain's basin. The heavy sword was useless in the shallow water. Elara did not stop to fight. She sprinted toward the nearest unmarked service door, a small entrance she had meticulously sketched years ago that led to the food delivery chute. She knew this was the route to the outside, via the main kitchen. Elara burst into the chaos of the royal kitchen, a furnace of heat, steam, and screaming cooks. She ran past the massive ovens, dodging the terrified staff, and plunged down the greasy, narrow food chute that led to the loading docks outside the city walls. She landed hard on a pile of refuse bags beneath the loading chute, bruised, breathless, and utterly alone. She was free of the palace. But she was now a fugitive in the brutal, martial law-enforced city she had just mapped for her enemy. She started running, tearing off her rich palace tunic and leaving it behind. She was heading for the only sanctuary she had left, the lower city, the home of the unmarked. She was running toward Kael, praying he was not yet captured. Back in the palace, Valerius arrived at the scene. He saw the dead guard and the one sputtering in the fountain. He looked at the elegant, crimson trail leading from the fountain to the service chute. He was not angry. He was impressed. He realized the true scope of Elara's genius. She was not merely a mind, she was a fighter. He looked down at the diary in his hands, the final proof of her betrayal, delivered by her own mother. Valerius ordered the search. "She will run to the shadows," he commanded, his voice cold and resonant. "Seal the lower city perimeter. I want every alley, every cistern, every house searched. I want her alive. She is the only one who can translate the full palace schematics, and I want her to do it for the Empire." He had traded a life, Mistress Illyria's love, for the proof of his adversary's guilt. The trap had failed to capture Elara, but it had successfully destroyed her family and confirmed her dedication to the restoration. Elara was finally, completely, part of the rebellion. Elara emerged from the city's loading docks, a creature of the dark, shed of her palace silks, wearing the rough tunic of a kitchen worker. She ran on pure adrenaline, fueled by the guilt of her mother's betrayal and the imminent threat to Kael. The Black Garden was a derelict, walled-off park near the city's perimeter, a place the Seraphim had abandoned decades ago, believing it to be cursed. It was now a critical rendezvous point for the Obsidian Hand, a place where their runners met before dissolving into the desert shadows. Elara knew Kael would be there, preparing his final move with the palace schematics, the weapon he now held. She reached the crumbling, ivy-covered wall of the Black Garden and slipped through a broken section, landing silently on damp earth. The garden was a tangle of wild vines and dead marble statues, covered by the oppressive canopy of ancient, gnarled trees. She found Kael and Master Theron crouched by a ruined fountain. Kael was etching the palace schematics, copied onto a durable leather scroll, onto a flat, white stone, preparing it for dissemination to the desert tribes. He was a man consumed by purpose. Kael! Elara hissed, collapsing next to him. Kael spun around, his hand already on his knife. When he saw Elara, bruised, bleeding, and dressed in rags, his focus broke. The etched stone fell from his hand. Elara! What happened? The guards. It was a trap. She cut him off, her voice urgent and strained. The general knew the archives plan. He has my maps, the schematics of the tunnels, the patrol routes. He knows about the pilot's water control seals in the Well of Echoes. He knows your ultimate objective. Theron, the elder scribe, looked instantly grim. The control point is our only leverage. If he takes that, we have nothing to bargain with. It's worse, Elara gasped, clutching Kael's arm. He let me escape. He didn't want a dead spy. He wanted a live message. He is using me, Kael. This entire garden, the air, it could be bugged. He is listening, waiting for us to make the next move. Kael looked at her, his face a mask of conflict, the joy of her survival battling the terror of her warning. He touched the scar on her jaw. We leave now. We take the schematics and disappear into the desert. We fight another day. As Kael started to gather the schematics and his tools, the faint, sickeningly familiar scent of seraphim pine resin drifted through the air, a subtle, military-grade smoke used by the Praetorians for covert signaling. They were surrounded. Suddenly, a chilling, familiar voice cut through the stillness of the garden, amplified by a hidden acoustic device. It came not from one direction, but seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath them. I thank you, Elara, for confirming my final assessment. General Valerius stepped out from behind a massive, ivy-covered wall. He was alone, flanked only by the unseen voices of his silent, hidden guard. He held Elara's stolen diary, the book of her secret maps. The obsidian hand, Valerius's voice resonated, cold and mocking. The great rebellion, caught like rats in a forgotten pit. You hold a piece of history, Kael. But I hold the present. He held up the diary, its obsidian cover catching the faint moonlight. I know every tunnel, every supply line, every single member of your command structure. You only know what she allowed you to see, Kael shouted, stepping in front of Elara. Valerius laughed, a short, cruel sound. A noble sentiment, Kael. But let's test that loyalty, shall we? He raised his voice, loud enough for the hidden guards to hear, yet addressing only Elara. You are valuable, Elara. But the rebellion is not. I have sealed all exits from this garden. You have precisely 1 hour to choose who walks free. He laid out his devastating terms. Option A, you, Elara, surrender to me, and agree to translate the pilot's schematics for the Seraphim. In exchange, I will let Kael, Theron, and the rest of the Obsidian Hand walk free, and I will only conduct a token purge of the lower city. You save the Restoration's leadership. Option B, you and Kael attempt to escape, or you choose to sacrifice yourselves here. In retaliation, I will execute Master Theron and all the captured members of the Obsidian Hand. Then, I will conduct a total, bloody purge of the lower city, Every unmarked sympathizer will be eliminated. You save the pilot's schematics. The clock is ticking, Elara. Will you choose your lover's life and surrender the weapon, or will you choose the weapon and let thousands of people die? The silence that followed was a black hole of moral agony. Kael immediately grabbed Elara's arm. No! We fight! We break through! We will not trade your life for anything! Theron grabbed Kael, his grip iron-hard. Kael, listen! The schematics are useless if there's no one left to use them. The people are the cause. Elara, you must choose A. Your intellect is too valuable to Valerius. He will keep you alive. We will find a way to save you later. Elara could barely breathe. The weight of the Seraphim Empire had narrowed down to a single, terrible choice. Surrender, save Kael, save the lives of the unmarked, but give Valerius the key to perpetual power. Kael would live, but the fight would be functionally over. Fight, save the schematics, preserve the idea of freedom, but let Kael watch the annihilation of his movement and the massacre of his people. She looked at Kael, whose eyes were pleading with her to choose fight, to save herself, to save their shared cause. But Elara was a historian. She knew that a revolution without people was merely a collection of scrolls. The goal was restoration, and the people were the foundation. Kael, listen to me, Elara whispered, forcing the words out. The people are the covenant. The schematics are only a tool. If we die with them now, Valerius wins forever. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek, a final, heartbreaking touch. I cannot let your people die. I will not trade human lives for a piece of clay. She took a deep, shuddering breath and turned, stepping away from Kael, walking toward the shadows where Valerius stood. She was sacrificing her freedom for the soul of the restoration. General Valerius! Elara called out, her voice cracking but firm. I choose option A. I will surrender. Let Kael, Master Theron, and the others go free. You have my word. I will be your analyst. I will translate the pilot's schematics for the Empire. Kael roared, a sound of absolute, desperate anguish, struggling against Theron's grip. Elara! No! Don't do it! It's another trap! Valerius raised his hand, silencing his hidden troops. A noble choice, Elara. The choice of a true statesman, not a romantic rebel. Kael, you are free to go. And know this, you owe your life to her willingness to serve the Empire. He signaled his men to lower their weapons. Elara walked forward, her head held high, until she stood directly opposite Valerius. Your conditions are met, General, she stated, her body trembling. Now let them leave unharmed. Valerius did not look away from her. He looked at Kael. Leave, Kael. The path is open. But if you are foolish enough to return to this city, I will revoke my bargain, and the purge will begin. Kael, pulled by Theron and the desperate logic of survival, gave Elara one last, agonizing look, a silent vow of vengeance and rescue, before disappearing into the thick canopy. As the sound of the fugitives faded, Valerius turned to Elara, his expression one of terrifying, complex respect. Welcome back to the Order, Elara. You have just saved thousands of lives. Now let us begin the work of destroying the very idea you fought for. He signaled his two closest Praetorians. They did not put her in chains. They took her by the arm, one on each side, escorting her back to the palace, not as a captured criminal, but as a defeated, high-value asset. Elara was a prisoner again, but this time, her captivity was absolute, having been bought with the promise of her own survival and Kael's escape. The trap was sprung, and Elara had become the most dangerous tool in the Empire's arsenal. Kael did not run from the Black Garden. He was dragged out, his mind shattered by the knowledge of Elara's sacrifice. Master Theron and the Breakers held him down, pushing him through the undergrowth, forcing him into the North Gate's abandoned tunnels as the general's silent units closed in behind them. The memory of Elara's face, her terrible, final moment of commitment, burned hotter than any desert sun. He was alive, but only because she had chosen his life over her freedom, his people over her soul. He carried the pilot schematics, the key to the Empire's lifeblood, but the cost was an unbearable, aching emptiness. They spent days in the unforgiving outer wastes, a merciless stretch of arid land beyond the reach of the Seraphim aqueducts. The Empire had assumed that anyone who fled the city would perish here, a forgotten execution by thirst. But Kael was not a city man. His ancestors were the nomadic tribes who knew the secret language of the desert. He led his exhausted, demoralized group not by map, but by memory of the stars, reading the faint, ancient signs of underground water. Theron, the elder scribe, was Kael's anchor. She didn't sacrifice herself for a man, Kael, he said one night, as they huddled around a low fire. She sacrificed herself for an idea. She gave you the schematics. Your mission is now absolute. Weaponize the truth. The fugitives settled near the ruins of the Three Sisters, a trio of forgotten sandstone mountains revered by the old tribes. It was here that Kael began his true transformation. The angry rebel dissolved, replaced by a cold, calculating leader driven by the singular goal of Elara's rescue and the Empire's dismantling. He knew his fight could no longer be just an internal resistance. He needed a force that could challenge the Seraphim on their own terms. He needed allies. Kael sought out the scattered, fiercely independent Khmer tribes, the ancestors of the Unmarked, who had been fighting the Empire's expansion for 4 centuries. The Khmer were masters of hit-and-run warfare, unrivaled riders, and experts in survival, but they held a deep, cynical distrust of all city dwellers, even the Unmarked. The Khmer leader, Matriarch Lyra, a fierce, scarred woman whose lineage dated back to the signing of the Covenant, met Kael with contemptuous indifference. You come from the Blackstone Walls, Lyra sneered, looking at his city clothes and his exhausted men. You bring us the smell of dust and defeat. Why should the free people of the desert bleed for the city that betrayed us? Kael did not offer them gold or men. He offered them proof of their own dignity. He unrolled the Desert Covenant scroll, the ancient agreement Elara had retrieved from the archives. He translated the Pilus Blue's cipher and the promise of shared water and rotating power. The Empire told you that the city grew too large and forgot you. Kael announced, his voice strong beneath the desert stars. The covenant proves they stole your water and betrayed your law. This is not a rebellion, it is a reclamation of justice. The Empire is an illegal occupier. The ancient scroll was a spark. It validated 400 years of their resistance. Matriarch Elara, seeing the historical and legal gravity of the document, agreed to the alliance. The Kamar tribes would fight, but only if Kael could deliver them the leverage they needed to force the Seraphim out permanently. Kael knew the leverage was in the schematics, but the Pilus engineers had a second, greater secret, rumored among the desert people, the geoharmonic system. He consulted the Kamar elders, who guarded the myths of the deep desert. They led him into a vast, silent canyon, carved by wind and time. Here, hidden in a subterranean cavern, Kael found the final, terrifying piece of the Pilus legacy. It was not a weapon of iron or fire, but a massive, circular chamber carved into the rock, covered in complex Pilosian glyphs. In the center lay a perfectly smooth obsidian disk, vibrating faintly with an internal energy. Theron translated the glyphs, his voice hushed with awe. The Pilus did not just move water. They mastered the Earth's frequency. This disk, it is a seismic resonator. It can amplify natural earth tremors, subtly diverting water tables, causing landslides, or, at its maximum frequency, shaking the very foundations of stone. Kael realized the magnitude of his discovery. The Seraphim Empire had built its great black walls on the assumption that stone was eternal. The geoharmonic system was a way to make the earth itself reject the Empire. He understood his task. Elara had given him the schematics, the key to unlocking the system's operation. Now, he had the system itself. He had the ultimate weapon of the restoration. He spent the next weeks with the Kamar engineers, a blend of ancient knowledge and urgent, modern need. They learned how to operate the geoharmonic disk, a slow, complex process of calculating the obsidian city's resonant frequency. One evening, standing on the edge of the canyon, Kael looked back toward the distant, hazy direction of the Seraphim capital, the place where Elara was held. He pulled out the small, carved wooden starling Elara had given him years ago. He had carried it through every tunnel, every crisis, every moment of betrayal. He looked at the distant, silent horizon and made a vow that cut him to the core. "I will not sacrifice you in vain, Elara," he whispered into the desert wind. "You bought us time. You gave us the weapon. I will use it to tear down the walls that hold you, brick by black brick. The Seraphim will fall, not by battle, but by the will of the earth." He was no longer a rebel fighting for survival. He was the commander of a revolutionary army, armed with the power of the planet and driven by a promise of rescue. His exile was over. The counterattack was about to begin. Elara's isolation was absolute. She lived in the general's tower, confined to her luxurious but heavily guarded chambers. Her days were spent translating the Pilus schematics, the very documents she had risked her life to steal for Kael, and drafting tactical analysis for General Valerius. She was treated not as a prisoner, but as a high-value asset, given the finest clothes, the most nourishing food, and unlimited resources for her work. But every kindness was a chain, and every luxury a reminder of her terrible sacrifice. General Valerius maintained his strange, cold admiration. He viewed her as a broken, but still potent, weapon. "You translate these Pylosian glyphs with a reverence, Elara," Valerius observed one evening, watching her work by the glow of a single lamp. "You admire the genius of this ancient technology. Do you truly believe Kael can weaponize this?" "I know Kael, General," Elara replied, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He is driven by passion, but he is guided by the intellect of Master Theron. They will weaponize this, not for destruction, but for leverage. They seek to cut off the city's lifeblood to force a negotiation based on the Covenant." Valerius smiled thinly. "Excellent analysis. And where is Kael? Logically, where would a commander with Pylosian power and desert tribe allies establish his base?" Elara knew he was testing her. She pointed to a remote, arid stretch on the map, hundreds of miles from the Kamar tribes. "He will hide in the most isolated segment of the outer wastes, a place where the Seraphim legions cannot sustain a campaign. He will not engage until his allies are fully united." She had successfully sent Valerius on a months-long campaign of searching empty desert, buying Kael the time he desperately needed. Her forced translation of the schematics was a daily act of high treason. The original Pylosian script detailed the entire water and power grid of the Obsidian City, including the location of every pressure valve, every pipe junction, and the sealed water control system beneath the Well of Echoes. As she translated, Elara inserted subtle, undetectable errors into the Seraphim's official copies. Pressure valve reversals. She switched the diagrams for 2 critical pressure valves deep in the aqueduct system, ensuring that if the Seraphim were to attempt to increase water flow during a siege, they would actually cut it off. Structural misdirection. She slightly altered the load-bearing calculations for the 3 oldest sections of the black walls, making them appear stronger than they were, ensuring that Valerius would concentrate defenses elsewhere. Control code twist. The schematics were protected by a final, complex alphanumeric code. Elara translated the final character sequence not into the Seraphim equivalent for order, but for fracture. She was meticulously preparing the Seraphim Empire for internal failure, all while serving as their most trusted analyst. Her greatest challenge was establishing communication with the outside. She knew Kael would send runners to the city, scouts who needed to know she was alive, and more importantly, what Valerius's countermeasures were. Elara utilized the single, fragile link she still possessed, the tapestry studio and her old work. Valerius had allowed her to keep a small, simple weaving loom in her room, a concession to her former career. She began weaving small, inconsequential squares of fabric, ostensibly for practice. The weaving was her new cipher. Color. If she used pale almond thread, it meant Kael was safe. If she used deep ochre, desert tribes, it meant Kael was in immediate danger. Pattern. The number of knots in a specific corner indicated the month of Valerius's predicted mobilization. The message. She used the tension of the weave itself. A weave that was too taut meant Valerius was closing a trap. A weave that was too loose meant she was free to move. She needed a way to get these small, critical squares to Anya, the chambermaid, who could deliver them to the runners. The opportunity arose during the general's bi-weekly inspection of the outer guard. Elara knew Valerius would be gone for 8 hours, and the internal staff would relax their vigilance. She meticulously stitched one of her small squares, a pale almond thread with a complex knot count, into the inner lining of the general's ceremonial cloak, a cloak that was sent to the laundry every 2 weeks. The cloak would pass through the kitchen, through Anya's hands, and into the network of the obsidian hand. It was an agonizing, slow form of communication, but it was undetectable. The first message reached Kael months later in the depths of the outer wastes. It was a single, small square of pale, serene almond-colored linen, stitched with the number 7. Kael immediately understood. Pale almond meant she was alive and safe. 7 meant Valerius would mobilize his final defense in the 7th month. He had exactly 7 months to master the geoharmonic disk and bring the Kamar tribes to the Obsidian City. Elara was not just surviving, she was commanding his timeline. Back in the tower, General Valerius was increasingly satisfied with Elara's work. Her maps and analysis were flawless. He had secured the key to the Empire's defense. "You have given us the gift of certainty, Elara," he said, handing her a rare, sweet fruit. "You have proven that loyalty to order is superior to loyalty to sentiment. The Empire is now invulnerable." "General," Elara replied, choosing her final, most potent lie. "The Empire is strong, but Kael is intelligent. He will not attack the walls or the gates. He will attack the Empire's supply lines, the food, the fuel, the metal for weapons. That is the final, logical step of the starved revolutionary." Valerius nodded, entirely convinced by the classical logic. He immediately shifted the deployment of his legions, sending them far out into the periphery to guard supply depots. Elara had done it. She had successfully steered the Imperial legions far away from the city, leaving the black walls and the internal water control seals almost unguarded. She had given Kael the final, fatal opening. She looked at her loom, the remaining spools of thread. The time for silent communication was over. She was now prepared for the final, desperate act. The Empire was ready to fall. The Obsidian City had always prided itself on its immunity to the natural world. Its vast aqueducts, fed by distant mountain glaciers, seemed to guarantee eternal supply. But in the 7th month, precisely as Elara's cipher had predicted, a subtle, terrifying change began. It started with a low, almost imperceptible humming, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come not from machinery, but from the granite bedrock beneath the city. This was Kael's work. Out in the outer wastes, the Kamar engineers, guided by the pilot's schematics, were slowly, methodically activating the geoharmonic disk. They were not aiming for destruction, but for subtle, sustained frequency disruption. The high-frequency resonance began to gently fracture the underlying rock layers, subtly diverting the deep, subterranean water tables that fed the Seraphim aqueducts. The first sign of crisis was not the empty cisterns, but the pressure drop in the high-level waterworks. The marble fountains in the Emperor's central gardens began to trickle, then ceased entirely. The aqueducts, once roaring with life, slowed to a sluggish crawl. The Empire was struck by a terrifying, engineered drought. General Valerius, confident in Elara's analysis that Kael would attack supply lines, was far from the city, directing legions toward empty grain vaults. The city's water crisis caught him completely off guard. When Valerius rushed back, his face a mask of furious confusion, he found Elara meticulously reviewing the pilot's schematics, feigning intense concentration. "Elara! The water! It's failing! What does the pilot's data suggest? A natural shift? A geological anomaly?" Elara looked up, her expression one of profound concern, a performance honed over months. "General, the schematics confirm the pilot's engineers warned of the wasteland's frequency, a specific cyclical earth tremor that can momentarily disrupt flow," she explained, a perfect logical lie. "But this is not a natural event. This is engineered. Kael is not attacking the supplies. He is attacking the water source itself." Valerius stared at her, rage giving way to a terrible dawning realization. He had been played. She had not lied. She had simply given him the correct answer to the wrong question. She had directed his focus away from the city's actual vulnerability, the water flow mechanics. "The schematics, Elara! What is the counter mechanism? Where is the valve to restore pressure?" Elara pointed him to a section of the schematics. The pressure valve schematics she had deliberately reversed. "The primary flow regulator near the western junction. It is designed to force maximum flow into the central aqueduct. If Kael has targeted the flow, the Emperor must order this valve opened immediately to compensate." Valerius, desperate, believed her. He immediately sent his praetorians to the western junction to open the regulator valve. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic, exactly as Elara had planned. When the guards forced the regulator valve open, it was actually the valve for the drain and cut-off system she had marked in the pilot's schematics. Instead of increasing the flow, the valve severed the main central aqueduct, diverting the remaining water supply into the ancient, lower drainage system and accelerating the drought. Within hours, the main seraphim reservoirs were bone-dry. The god emperor, ruling from his now parched palace, was driven to panic. The drought was immediate, visible, and terrifying. His high council, terrified of chaos, demanded an explanation. The emperor, refusing to accept that the empire's eternal structure could be flawed, turned immediately to the oldest scapegoat, the unmarked. The imperial decree was announced at sunset. "The failure of the water is a divine judgment brought forth by the impurity and treason of the unmarked sympathizers still lurking within the city. The Emperor has ordered a purge of cleansing to restore the city to divine favor." The purge was swift, brutal, and utterly counterproductive. Praetorians, already frustrated by the strategic failures, descended on the lower city and the impoverished periphery. They seized water from the few remaining public wells, burned the makeshift markets, and conducted mass arrests based on suspicion and past records. This was the Empire's fatal error. The purge achieved precisely what Kael and Elara had fought for. It utterly eroded the loyalty of the moderate populace and the lower-tier imperial servants who had previously supported the throne out of fear or economic necessity. A silent revolt began. The imperial cooks began to burn the emperor's food. The stable boys began to lame the imperial horses. The very foundation of the empire, the lower-tier servants who kept the machine running, began to withdraw their labor in a silent, coordinated protest. The machine was seizing up. In the general's tower, Valerius stood over the translated schematics, his face gray with the realization that Elara had fooled him, not once, but repeatedly. He saw the subtle, but undeniable, switch of the regulator and drain symbols. He looked at Elara, who stood with the same calm, analytical focus, and he felt a cold, terrifying respect. "You have given them the key to the city's throat, Elara," Valerius stated, his voice a flat monotone of defeat. "And you have made me your pawn. You used my own logic against me. The wasteland's frequency, a beautiful, perfect lie. The truth is never simple, General," Elara replied, finally dropping the facade of fear. "You forced me to save Kael's life. But you did not force me to sacrifice the restoration. I gave you the appearance of order, while I prepared for fracture." Valerius did not arrest her. He had no time. He knew the true, terrifying confrontation was only days away. He needed her to translate the schematics fully, even the parts she had already sabotaged, because he was now fighting Kael's Pylosian knowledge with only her Pylosian knowledge. "Kael will attack now," Valerius stated, his mind racing to recover. "The drought, the chaos, it is the perfect window. Where will he strike? Where is the weakest point?" Elara looked up at the general, her eyes meeting his with cold, resolute determination. "General," she said, her voice clear and strong, "Kael is coming for the water control seals beneath the Well of Echoes. He must gain physical control of the flow to prove the Empire's illegitimacy. He will use the cover of the dust storm that is due to hit the city in 3 days' time." She was giving him the truth this time. But the truth was too late. The Imperial legions were hundreds of miles away, guarding empty grain vaults. The city was dry, paranoid, and consumed by internal strife. Valerius stared at her, finally accepting the inevitability of the catastrophe she had engineered. He had only a handful of loyal Praetorians left in the city. The great, eternal Seraphim Empire was about to face its reckoning. This devastating segment marks the beginning of the final siege, with the Empire paralyzed by internal chaos. The air over the Obsidian City was thick, not just with panic, but with the grit of an approaching dust storm. It was a natural phenomenon, massive, blinding, and terrifying, but for Kael, it was a perfectly timed, divine gift. It was the cover he needed to bring his desert tide to the black walls. Kael led a unified force unlike any the Seraphim had ever imagined. It was a fusion of two worlds. The Kamar cavalry, thousands of fierce, expert riders from the desert tribes, swift, silent, and motivated by the ancient betrayal of the Covenant. They moved like a wave, their faces masked against the rising sand, their spears tipped with hardened obsidian. The unmarked vanguard, the thousands liberated from the salt mines, hardened by the wilderness, now forming the core of the infantry, guided by Master Theron. They carried the heavy gear, the siege ropes, and the tools for their true objective, the Well of Echoes. Kael rode at the head of the column, no longer wearing the rough linen of the rebel, but the traditional, flowing pale almond robes of the Kamar chieftain, a color symbolizing hope and his promise to Elara. In his hand, he carried a heavy, polished bronze device, the control amplifier for the geoharmonic disc. The army halted a mile from the city, just as the first wave of the dust storm enveloped them, cutting visibility to mere feet. The timing was flawless. Kael gave his final command to Master Theron. The main force of the Kamar will create a massive diversion at the south gate, where Valerius expects panic. But the true objective remains the Well of Echoes. You will lead the breakers through the northern service tunnels, the route Elara mapped years ago. Get to the water control seals. Theron gripped Kael's arm. And you, Kael? I am the distraction, Kael said, his voice grim. I am going to the most vulnerable part of the wall, the section Elara disguised in her schematics. I will use the disc to give you an opening. But I have to find her first. He looked at the obsidian city, now a looming, black shadow in the swirling dust. He was coming for the city's heart, but primarily, he was coming for her. Kael took a small, elite cohort of Kamar warriors to the northeastern wall, a massive section of the Black Wall that, according to Elara's sabotage and the schematics, was structurally unsound due to ancient Pylosian stress points. He had the geoharmonic disc, a massive obsidian plate carved with the Pylosian cipher, carried on a massive sled pulled by 3 desert horses. He positioned the disc deep in a hidden ravine, far enough from the wall to avoid immediate detection, yet close enough to transmit the necessary seismic frequency. Kael knelt, placing the control amplifier onto the disc. The device glowed with a faint, inner blue light, the color of the forbidden pilus blue. He focused, remembering the terrifying calculations Elara had included in the schematics, the coordinates for the Empire's most vulnerable frequency. He slowly, methodically began to tune the disc to the resonant frequency of the black obsidian itself. As the disc resonated, the deep, low humming that had plagued the city intensified tenfold. It was not a sound one heard with the ears, but with the bone. The very foundations of the Black Wall began to tremble. Inside the city, General Valerius was fighting a losing battle against chaos. The Praetorian Guard was demoralized by the drought and the mass descent of the imperial staff. He was in the Grand Hall, directing his few remaining loyal troops, when the humming turned into a deep, guttural roar. He felt the marble floor shift beneath his feet. He saw the tapestries on the wall ripple, and the massive, imperial statues tilt slightly. Valerius stared at Elara, who was secured in the Grand Hall's high gallery, guarded by 2 of his most trusted men. She was watching the spectacle with a cold, triumphant light in her eyes. The wasteland's frequency, Valerius muttered, finally understanding the true Pylosian lie. It's not a natural event, Elara. It's a weapon. He grabbed his sword and rushed toward the gallery. The wall! Where is the weakest point, Elara? If you want to live, tell me where they are going to strike. Elara did not flinch. She used the opening to finally speak the truth she had held for months, her voice ringing out over the terrifying rumble. They will strike the northeast wall, General. The point of the unwritten seal. The load-bearing calculations are false. Kael has the power to bring the wall down. Valerius hesitated for only a second. He knew her confession was a double-edged sword, the truth of the location, but also the confirmation of her total betrayal. He had no choice. To the northeast wall! Valerius screamed, grabbing his remaining forces. Protect the foundation! If that wall falls, the city falls! Outside, at the northeast wall, Kael poured all his concentration into the disk. The ancient obsidian plate was now vibrating violently, humming with a frequency that threatened to shatter it. The ground beneath his feet was shifting. And then, with a deafening, grinding crack, the black wall groaned. A massive, 10-meter section of the obsidian wall, weakened by the geoharmonic frequency, fractured in a cascade of rubble and dust, collapsing inward with the sound of 1,000 years of history breaking. The gate to the eternal city was open. Kael immediately stopped the disk. He grabbed the schematics, the control amplifier, and looked at the gaping, dusty hole in the greatest fortress in the world. Theron! Go! The Well of Echoes is open! He roared into the communication line. He didn't wait for a reply. He handed the schematics to a Kamar rider. Find the old woman, the kitchen servant. Tell her to take this to Elara's mother. It's her only proof of her daughter's innocence. Then, Kael mounted his horse and charged through the dust-choked breach in the wall. He wasn't heading for the Well of Echoes. He was heading for the General's Tower. He was coming for Elara. The desert tide had breached the invincible walls. The final, agonizing battle for the soul of the Seraphim Empire had begun. The breach in the northeast wall was a symbol of the Empire's terminal decay, and Kael's entrance was a harbinger of its doom. The dust storm swirled, choking the air and confusing the desperate Praetorians who raced to defend the General's Tower. Kael rode through the collapsing rubble, abandoning his horse at the city's perimeter. He moved now as a true breaker, silent, swift, and lethal. The pilot's schematics were secured by Master Theron's team, but Kael's only focus was the tower, the highest and darkest needle in the heart of the city, where Elara was held. The city had descended into utter chaos. The drought-stricken populace, energized by the sight of the broken wall and the sound of the Kamar war cries, rose up in a terrifying, spontaneous revolt. The unmarked poured out of the lower city, using the dry, unused aqueduct channels as routes to attack the palace quarter. Kael fought his way through the winding, panicked streets, a blur of shadow and controlled violence. He didn't seek large battles, he sought a path. He used the chaos as his shield, employing the techniques Elara had mapped, targeting the weak points in the administrative building defenses, moving through the secondary courtyards. His objective was the main stairwell of the General's Tower, the most direct route to Valerius's private chambers and Elara. General Valerius, having correctly anticipated Kael's final, personal move, had evacuated the God Emperor and the royal family moments before the wall fell. He remained in the general's tower, commanding his final Praetorian Guard, a small cohort of fiercely loyal soldiers. He was not defending the emperor, he was defending his prize, Elara. He had placed Elara, under guard, in his war room, a chamber overlooking the city, which now offered a perfect, terrifying view of the unfolding rebellion. He wanted her to witness the chaos her choices had unleashed. "Look at it, Elara!" Valerius commanded, gesturing to the city below, where fires were beginning to glow through the swirling dust. "This is your restoration. Chaos. Death. The end of all order." Elara stared out the window, her expression grim but resolute. "This is the cost of the restoration, General. The cost you demanded when you tried to extinguish the truth." Kael reached the base of the general's tower. The entrance was heavily defended by a blockade of armed Praetorians. This was the clash he had planned to avoid, but Elara was only floors above. He charged the line, moving with the brutal efficiency of a desert storm. The first guards fell instantly to his obsidian-tipped knives. He used the narrow entry corridor to his advantage, forcing the soldiers to engage him one-on-one. He was fueled by months of frustrated desperation, his movements too fast for the city-trained soldiers. He cleared the entrance and began his terrifying ascent of the main stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. The stairs were narrow, winding, and a perfect choke point. Valerius had stationed pockets of guards on every 3rd floor. Kael cut through them with savage determination. He was not fighting for territory, he was fighting for time. He knew the true, final battle for the city's future was unfolding beneath the Well of Echoes, where Theron's team raced to control the water flow. His battle was personal. He finally burst onto the top floor, entering the corridor leading to the war room. The only thing separating him from Elara was a final line of 6 Praetorian elite, Valerius's personal guard, men with cold, disciplined eyes who stood like statues of death. Kael paused, breathing heavily, his pale almond robe stained with dust and blood. He looked past the guards, through the open door of the war room. He saw Elara. She was standing by the general's large, circular war table, her hands resting on the map of the city. He locked eyes with her. In that moment of absolute danger, everything else faded. It was the answer to months of agonizing uncertainty, a silent confirmation of their unbreakable vow. "Elara," Kael whispered, a raw sound of relief and dread. General Valerius stepped out from the war room, standing directly between Kael and his final goal. He was clad in his polished black battle armor, his sword, a massive, ancient blade forged from meteoric iron, held loosely in his hand. "The Desert King has arrived," Valerius stated, his voice calm amidst the rising chaos. "Your movement is over, Kael. The schematics will be useless. I will not let you take her." Kael ignored the general. He focused on the 6 elite guards. He didn't have time for a prolonged fight. He needed a distraction. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a handful of crude, black dust, a mixture of finely ground salt mine obsidian and volatile desert sulfur. He hurled the dust at the guards' faces. Blinded and momentarily disoriented, the Praetorians stumbled. Kael seized the moment, vaulting over the confusion and charging directly at Valerius. The clash was brutal. Valerius was a master swordsman, his movements honed by decades of discipline and power. He fought with the crushing, predictable weight of order. Kael fought with the agile, unpredictable speed of necessity. Valerius's sword was heavy, aimed at disabling. Kael used his smaller, faster knife, aiming for the weak points in the general's armor, the neck, the joints, the exposed parts of the hands. "You sacrifice yourself for a woman!" Valerius roared, clashing his sword against Kael's knife, sparks flying. "The Empire will survive sentiment! I sacrifice nothing!" Kael shouted back, dodging a massive swing that carved a deep gouge into the marble wall. "I fight for the truth! The truth that you killed her mother for!" That final, terrible knowledge momentarily broke Valerius's composure. The revelation of his own cruelty stalled his blade for a fraction of a second. Kael found his opening. He slammed his body into Valerius's breastplate, pushing the general backward and into the war room. The general stumbled, his massive sword falling from his hand and clattering onto the marble floor. The two men grappled, crashing over the general's war table, shattering the intricate map of the Seraphim Empire. The fall gave Elara her moment. She was not passive. As the men wrestled, Elara grabbed the general's massive, dropped sword. It was too heavy for her to wield, but she lifted it with both hands, aiming its tip not at Kael, but at the schematic map holder on the wall, the secure case where Valerius kept his master copy of the translated Pilus schematics. With a surge of final, desperate strength, Elara drove the meteoric blade through the glass and into the parchments, pinning the translated schematics to the wall. "It stops here, General!" Elara screamed. "You will never have the power!" Valerius looked up, seeing the destruction of his victory, the destruction of his order. He stared at Elara, seeing the total annihilation of his life's work. His intellectual obsession turned to blind, annihilating rage. He shoved Kael aside and lunged, not for his sword, but for Elara. Kael tackled the general, slamming him hard against the war room window. The glass shattered, letting in the full, howling fury of the dust storm and the terrifying roar of the rebellion below. The two men collapsed, locked in a final, lethal embrace, the fate of the Empire crashing down around them. The general's war room was a scene of chaos and terminal collapse. The dust storm howled through the shattered window, and the city below roared with the sound of revolt. The tower, Kael versus Valerius. Kael and Valerius were locked in a desperate, final struggle. They wrestled amidst the shards of the shattered war table and the glass of the window, two ideologies fighting for supremacy. Valerius, driven by the need for order, sought to crush the rebellion. Kael, driven by necessity and the hope for restoration, fought for his life and the freedom Elara had bought him. Valerius momentarily broke free, scrambling for a piece of heavy marble from the destroyed table. He lunged at Kael, attempting to crush his skull. Kael sidestepped the blow, and in a final, agonizing surge of movement, he grabbed the handle of the meteoric iron sword that Elara had plunged into the translated schematics. He pulled the heavy sword free, ripping the scorched parchments from the wall. The imperial copies were now useless, torn and bloodied. Kael brought the sword down, not with a killing blow, but with calculated precision. He aimed the massive blade directly at the left shoulder joint of Valerius's armor. The impact was deafening. The ancient, perfectly forged metal found the weak point in the general's defense, severing the nerve and paralyzing the arm. Valerius screamed, a sound of pure, shocked agony. The pain did not break his spirit, but the paralysis broke his ability to fight. He stumbled backward, collapsing against the crumbling stone wall. Kael stood over him, breathing hard, the great sword hanging heavy in his hand. "It's over, General," Kael rasped. "The order is broken." "No," Valerius spat, his one good hand scrabbling at the stone. "You will fail. You have the schematics, but you don't know the final frequency, the one needed to unlock the control seals. Without it, you cannot redirect the water. The rebellion will drown in the dry heat." Kael looked at Elara, who was standing frozen by the window, watching the final, terrible confrontation. "Elara!" Kael yelled, his voice strained. "The seals! Do you know the final frequency?" Elara was a historian. She had translated the documents. She knew the sequence. But sharing it now, in front of Valerius, was her final act of treason, the one that guaranteed her death sentence. She didn't hesitate. She looked directly at Kael, and her eyes held the clarity of absolute conviction. "It is the date of the Pylosian solar eclipse," Elara declared, reciting the forgotten sequence of numbers that was only recorded in the sealed archives. "The 4-digit cipher is 1-4-7-3. That is the lock. It is the beginning of the Pylosian calendar." Valerius stared at her, his face contorting in a final, profound betrayal. The ultimate knowledge, the foundation of the Empire's hidden power, had been sacrificed for a last act of defiance. Kael looked at Elara, a silent vow of love and desperation passing between them. He gave her a sharp, resolute nod, recognizing the immense finality of her action. He knew he had to leave her now. "Take him," Kael commanded, throwing the sword aside. He gestured to the 2 remaining elite guards, who were slowly recovering from the obsidian dust attack. "He is yours. Do not let him interfere." Kael grabbed Elara's arm. "We're leaving." "No," Elara whispered, stepping back. "Go to the Well of Echoes. They need the code. I am too valuable to kill right now. He needs me to translate the next thing. He is my shield, Kael. If I go, he sends everyone after us. Go. Restore the law." Kael hesitated, the agony of choice overwhelming him. But the destiny of the city was at stake. He pressed the almond blossom into her hand, a final, absolute promise. He turned and plunged back into the swirling chaos of the stairwell, racing toward the Well of Echoes. The cistern, the restoration of law. Far beneath the general's tower, in the suffocating darkness of the ancient cistern, Master Theron and the breakers had reached the water control seals. It was a solid wall of black, perfectly cut obsidian, the final barrier. They had explosives, but Theron forbade their use. The pilot's waterworks are too fragile. Explosions will crack the whole system. We use Elara's method, the lock. They found the control panel, a shallow recess in the wall, etched with the symbol of the ancient desert covenant. In the center, there was a heavy, circular, metallic keypad. Theron and the engineers worked frantically, trying dozens of historical sequences, but the Pylosian lock was immune to historical guesswork. Suddenly, a loud, familiar voice echoed down the shaft. Kael. He crashed into the cistern, covered in dust and blood, his chest heaving. Theron! The code! Elara gave it to me. 1-4-7-3. The Pylosian solar eclipse. Theron's eyes widened with awe and recognition. He understood the profound, symbolic truth. The original Pylus civilization began with the calculation of the eclipse. The lock was their signature. Theron turned to the control panel, his hands shaking slightly with the weight of 400 years of history. He punched in the final code, 1-4-7-3. With a deep, resonant thunk that vibrated through the rock and the bones of every man in the cistern, the obsidian seal retracted, sliding into the floor. The water control system was revealed, a massive array of ancient bronze valves and levers, etched with forgotten flow symbols. The water, Master Theron! Kael commanded. Redirect the flow to the lower city cisterns. Cut off the palace's high-level supply. Theron, Kael, and the Pylus engineers worked together, deciphering the flow mechanics. With a screech of metal and a sudden, violent surge of pressure, they pulled the great lever. The triumph of the desert tide. Outside the cistern, the results were instantaneous and total. In the upper city, the final high-level reservoirs feeding the palaces, temples, and general's tower ran dry with a horrifying, sucking sound. The drought became absolute for the ruling class. In the lower city, however, the ancient, forgotten cisterns beneath the unmarked quarters filled. Water, clean and cold, surged through the dry pipes, pouring into the storage tanks. The people of the lower city, defeated and waiting for the purge, looked on in stunned silence as the water began to flow, a miracle. The sight of the water flowing, not stolen, but restored to the unmarked, broke the Empire's psychological hold entirely. The silent revolution erupted into jubilation. The populace, now energized by life-giving water and the proof of the Empire's collapse, poured into the streets. Valerius, his arm hanging uselessly, watched from the shattered war room window as the last vestiges of his order dissolved into the dusty chaos. The city was taken not by arms, but by the restoration of its foundational truth. Kael, standing in the flowing water of the ancient cistern, looked up at the direction of the tower. Elara was alive, still in the hands of the defeated general, but the restoration was complete. The law had been reclaimed, and the eternal Seraphim Empire had choked on its own thirst. The climax is complete. The war is won. The Empire has fallen. The people of the lower city, defeated and waiting for the purge, looked on in stunned silence as the water began to flow, a miracle. The sight of the water flowing, not stolen, but restored to the unmarked, broke the Empire's psychological hold entirely. The silent revolution erupted into jubilation. The populace, now energized by life-giving water and the proof of the Empire's collapse, poured into the streets. Valerius, his arm hanging uselessly, watched from the shattered war room window as the last vestiges of his order dissolved into the dusty chaos. The city was taken not by arms, but by the restoration of its foundational truth. Kael, standing in the flowing water of the ancient cistern, looked up at the direction of the tower. Elara was alive, still in the hands of the defeated general, but the restoration was complete. The law had been reclaimed, and the eternal Seraphim Empire had choked on its own thirst. The climax is complete. The war is won. The Empire has fallen. The Seraphim Empire did not fall with a military defeat. It dissolved in a tide of water and reclaimed truth. The flowing water in the lower city cisterns was the final, irrefutable proof of the restoration's legitimacy, breaking the psychological hold of the God Emperor's rule. The reckoning. The immediate aftermath was swift and focused. Kael and the Obsidian Hand, backed by the Khmer tribes, did not indulge in random vengeance. They established order through law. General Valerius was the first priority. Kael found him still in the shattered war room, his arm broken, his eyes fixed on the map of his ruined empire. He was taken without resistance. He had lost his order, and with it, his will to fight. The God Emperor was found hiding in the deepest, dry sanctuary of the ziggurat. He was not executed. He was simply dethroned and stripped of his ceremonial trappings, his power evaporated by the loss of the water. Kael's first decree, issued from the main palace square, was one of restoration and reintegration. The Seraphim dynasty is at an end, Kael announced, standing beside Master Theron and Matriarch Lyra. The Desert Covenant is hereby reinstated as the foundational law of this land. The water flows to all people, and the leadership will be chosen by merit, not by blood. The Obsidian City was renamed Obsidia, its black walls now seen not as symbols of tyranny, but as monuments to Pylosian ingenuity and shared history. The final judgments. The fate of the general was brought before a council of the newly empowered Khmer elders and Obsidian Hand leadership. Valerius, when asked for his final defense, spoke with chilling clarity. I upheld order. Your revolution will fail because you value sentiment over structure. The world needs a firm hand, not a poetic one. Kael delivered the verdict, his voice ringing with the hard-won wisdom of the desert. You are stripped of rank and honor, General Valerius. You will not be executed. You will be sent to the outer wastes, where you will live under the protection of the Khmer. You will learn that the desert has an order more ruthless than any empire, one based on cooperation, not control. You will survive by the very necessity you scorned. Valerius was led away, a broken man condemned to the one place he feared most, the uncontrolled wilderness. The Weaver's Vigil. Elara was held in her chamber in the general's tower for 2 days after the coup. She expected arrest, trial, and execution. Her final act, the public declaration of the Pylosian cipher, was an undeniable act of treason against the collapsed Seraphim Empire. On the third day, the doors opened. It was Kael. He was no longer the desperate rebel. He wore the modest but authority-infused robes of a leader, his shoulders broader, his expression heavy with the burdens of governance. He carried no weapons, only a small, simple bouquet of desert flowers, pale almond blossoms. Elara stood, her heart racing. She was prepared to defend her choices. I know my fate, Kael. I gave the final code. I am a traitor to the old regime. I understand if I must answer for my choices. Kael walked to her, slowly closing the distance that had defined their lives. He did not speak of the Empire. He spoke of the Covenant. The Empire saw you as a traitor, Kael said, reaching for her hand and pulling her into the faint light of the window. But the Restoration sees you as the architect of its salvation. You risked your life to give us the truth. You sacrificed your mother's love to give us the schematics. You publicly betrayed the Empire to save the lives of thousands. You are the truest citizen of the Restoration. He placed the almond blossoms in her hand and then gently pulled her into an embrace, not the desperate, urgent embrace of the past, but one of deep, abiding commitment, the fulfillment of their ancient, secret vows. I am the soldier Elara, Kael whispered into her hair. But you are the law. We have reclaimed the city, but we need to build a society that cannot be undone by a single lie. A future forged in Obsidia. The Desert Covenant was ratified and immediately implemented. Master Theron oversaw the creation of the new Council of Restoration, a rotating body of leaders chosen from the city's technical experts, the unmarked citizens, and the Kamar tribal elders. Kael, as the undisputed leader of the liberation, refused the title of emperor or governor. He took the title of first steward, the chief executor of the council's will and the primary liaison to the Kamar tribes. Elara found her place not at Kael's side in a ceremonial role, but in the role that suited her best, the keeper of the archives and chief historian. Her first, profound task was to establish the Library of Unspoken Truths, a place where the history of the Pylus, the Desert Covenant, and the tyranny of the Seraphim were recorded for all time. She would weave the true history into tapestries, write it onto papyrus, and engrave it into the very walls of Obsidia. Years later, Obsidia was a changed city. The high-level aqueducts were being dismantled, replaced by a shared, managed water system flowing to all districts. The black walls remained, but they were now covered in massive, vibrant tapestries woven by Elara and her new generation of apprentices, tapestries that depicted the Desert Covenant and the Restoration. In her archive, surrounded by the smell of parchment and ancient dye, Elara worked tirelessly. She no longer wore silks, but the comfortable, practical pale almond robes of the new administration. Kael would visit her often. He would enter her quiet archive, leaving the heavy weight of the council's politics at the door. One evening, Kael watched her meticulously weaving a new banner, a depiction of the geoharmonic disk and the well of echoes. The people are happier, Elara, Kael said, leaning against her loom. The drought is over. The order is just. But sometimes, I still see the dust storm in my sleep. Elara smiled, her eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom she had gained through fire. She picked up the small, worn almond blossom carving and placed it in Kael's hand. The work is never finished, Steward Kael, Elara said, returning to her weaving. The seraphim built an empire on a lie of eternity. We will build a free city, not on the promise of eternity, but on the enduring strength of the truth. And that, Kael, is a thread we must weave every single day. Kael looked at the almond blossom, the symbol of their impossible hope and sacrifice, and then at the vibrant, honest tapestry Elara was weaving. He was the first steward of Obsidia, the soldier of the restoration, but she, the weaver, was the soul of their new world. The saga of the obsidian scar, the treason of the two impossible lovers, was complete. The scar was healed, replaced by the deep, enduring pattern of the Desert Covenant.